Hey guys, the Eye of Argon is a heroic fantasy novella that narrates the adventures of Grignr, a barbarian. It was written in 1970 by Jim Theis, who is a St. Louis, Missouri science fiction fan when he was 16.
St. Louis known for its sci-fi.
Oh, absolutely. The work was first published in 1970 in OSFAN, the Journal of the Ozark Science Fiction Society, number 10, and circulated anonymously in science fiction fandom since then. It has been described as one of the genre's most beloved pieces of appalling prose, the infamous worst fantasy novel ever, published for fans' enjoyment, and the apotheosis of bad writing. And has subsequently been used as a part of common science fiction convention party games since. David Langford described Theis in SFX magazine as a malaprop genius in McGonagall of prose with an eerie gift for choosing the wrong word and then misapplying it. So the idea here is we're playing the Eye of Argon game. The idea of this game is it's sort of a satire on authors and fans who take the works a little too seriously. So the goal is essentially to give this story a proper reading. Really make sure every word lands exactly as the author intended. So overdramatic reading, of course, is encouraged. There are 3 roles. There's the reader, the auditor, and the audience. The rules for the reader. The goal is to successfully read a single page as written without laughing. And you must start from the beginning of any sentence that you are assigned. It is much easier said than done. The rules for the auditor, so that's the person who just read prior. If the reader laughs, they lose and have to pass the story. If the reader mispronounces a word or pronounces a misspelled word correctly, they lose and have to pass the story. If the reader takes too long to continue, in an effort specifically not to laugh, they lose and must pass the story. And if the reader misrepresents or corrects any fucked up weird punctuation, they lose and have to pass the story. The rule for the audience: whenever you hear the phrase "the Eye of Argon," do that. So I guess I'll give you this. Actually, I guess you can start and then we'll start that way. There is a transcriber's note that I'll start us off with from the person who basically gave us this beautiful gift on the internet, one Don Simpson, from like a while back. Transcriber's note. Don Simpson. No mere transcription can give the true flavor of the original printing of the Eye of Argon. It is mimeographed with stencils cut on an elite manual typewriter. Many letters were so faint as to be barely readable. Others were overstruck, and some that were to be removed never got painted out with correction fluid. Usually, only one space separated sentences, while paragraphs were separated by a blank line and were indented 10 spaces. Many words were grotesquely hyphenated, and there were illustrations. I cannot do them justice in mere words, but they were a match for the text. These are the major losses of this version of the Eye of Argon. This one actually brought back a bunch of illustrations, and maybe we can show them off, but maybe I can edit them in.
Sure.
Otherwise, all effort has been made to retain the full and correct text, preserving even misspellings and dropped spaces. An excellent proofreader has checked it for errors both omitted and committed. What mismatches remain are mine, Don Simpson. I shall endeavor to keep a copy of the original available for viewing. There will be a link in the description, so it may be appreciated in all its fullness. But as a labor of love for those whose third-generation copies have now succumbed to the bitter vicissitudes of time and entropy, worn away by the ravages of countless rereadings before enthralled audiences.
Oh my god.
Yet who have found that the heady flavor of its stylistic paragraphs has seeped into their soul and still grips it with a fervid grasp, I dedicate this machine-readable version of the inimitable, the Eye of Argon.
Ooh! Alright.
So, yes.
And I just want to remind everyone to lean in.
Yeah.
And with that being said, this is the C-Pad, and I'm Cano Jaguar. Woo! I mean, it is. He's right.
It's true. Which way do we want to do this? Left, right?
To the right.
To the right? Okay. And then I guess we'll do this and then we come back around.
So what, you read first, then I'll read?
No, you read. You're up first.
I thought you were reading.
Yeah, I just did.
Okay, so now you're the auditor.
I'm the auditor. Alright, counts. I know.
Oh, the previous reader is the auditor?
Yes. That way they can't just like look ahead and kind of. So the goal is you have to read one page. If you read one page, you win and get to pass it.
Alright, here we go. The weather-beaten trail wound ahead into the dust-racked climes of the barren land which dominates large portions of the Mongolian Empire. Age-worn hoofprints smothered by the sifting sands of time shone dully against the dust-splattered crust of Earth. The tireless sun cast its parching rays of incandescence from overhead halfway through its daily revolution. Small rodents scampered about, occupying themselves in the daily accomplishments of their dismal lives. Dust sprayed over 3 heaving mounts in blinding clouds while they bore the burdensome cargoes of their struggling overseers.
I'll give it to you.
Prepare to embrace your creators in the Stygian haunts of hell, barbarian! Gasped the first soldier. Only after you have kissed the fleeting stead of death, wretch, returned Grignr. A sweeping blade of flashing steel riveted from the massive barbarian's hide, enameled shield as his rippling right arm thrust forth, sending a steel-shot blade into...
Oh,
no!
There you go. You're up.
So you gotta start from the start, a sweeping blade.
A sweeping blade of flashing steel riveted from the massive barbarian's hide, enameled shield as his rippling right arm thrust forth, sending a steel-shot blade to the hilt into the soldier's vital organs. The disemboweled mercenary crumbled from his saddle and sank to the clouded sward, sprinkling the parched dust with crimson droplets of escaping life fluid. The enthused barbarian swiveled about, his shock of fiery red hair tossing robustly in the humid air currents as he faced the attack of the defeated soldier's fellow-at-arms. "Damn you, barbarian!" shrieked the soldier as he observed his comrade in death. A gleaming scimitar smote a heavy blow against the renegade's spiked helmet, bringing a heavy cloud over the accordion's misting brain. Shaking off the effects of the pounding blow to his head, Grignr brought his scarlet streak edge.
You're good. Keep going.
Against the soldier's crudely forged hauberk, clanging harmlessly to the left side of his opponent. The soldier's stead whinnied as he directed the horse back from the driving blade of the barbarian. Grignr leashed his mount forward as the hoarsely piercing battle cry of his wilderness-bred race resounded from his grinding lungs. A twirling blade bounced harmlessly from the mighty thief's buckler as his rolling right arm cleft upward, sending a foot of blinding steel ripping through the Cimmerian's exposed gullet. A gasping gurgle from the soldier's writhing mouth as he tumbled to the golden sand at his feet and wormed agonizingly in his deathbed.
Cool. Yeah. A little more affect, CJ, come on.
Grignr's emerald green orbs glared lustfully as the wallowing soldier struggling before his chestnut-swirled mount. His scowling voice reverberated over the dying form in a tone of mocking mirth. "You city-bred dogs should learn not to antagonize your better." Reining his weary mount ahead, Grignr resumed his journey to the Norgolian city of Gorzum, hoping to discover wine, women, and adventure to boil the wild blood coursing through his savage veins.
That was amazing. That was good. You're done.
Oh no, he's gotta go to the...
Gotta get to about
Oh,
there.
I thought it was the page turn. Also, the last instance of Grignr was not capitalized.
I didn't capitalize it.
I'm proud of you.
The trek to Gorzum was forced upon Grignr when the soldiers of Kryn were leashed upon him by a faithless concubine he had wooed. His scandalous activities throughout the Cimmerian city had unleashed throngs of havoc and uproar among its refined patricians, leading them to tack a heavy reward over his head. He had barely managed to escape through the back entrance of the inn he had been guzzling in as a squad of soldiers pounced upon him. After spilling a spout of blood from the leader of the mercenaries, he dismembered one of the officer's arms. He retreated to his mount to make his way towards Gorzum, rumored to contain hordes of the plunder.
No.
And many young wenches for any man who has the backbone to wrest them away.
Alright, round of
that
applause
to
for
you.
CJ.
I added a last
Yeah, that's of the mistakes you could have made. That's pretty weak. Here, now you're the auditor.
auditor.
Hi, Felice.
Alright.
You don't have to stand in the doorway. You
Ah,
can grab that chair.
Grab a chair.
I don't know. There's these 2 chairs. There's
Yeah,
that
you got
chair.
chairs.
Grab that chair. You might not be super on camera, but we'll adjust at the break.
Make them shove over and sit on the trunk with them. You know.
Kind of lean in a bit a little.
Or just sit on CJ's lap.
I'll sit here. Hi everybody.
Hi,
How
Felice.
you doing?
Cameras.
Iron legs.
Okay. Arriving after dusk in Gorzum, Grignr descended down a dismal alley, reining his horse before a beaten tavern. The red-haired giant strode into the dimly lit hostelry, reeking of foul oat.
Is it hostelry or host?
It wasn't holstery. That's for sure.
Hostelry.
Yeah, holstery.
Nope.
Should be noted. This is chapter 2. It just says 2.
I'm just showing off because I got through my page.
We gotta give this story.
I made it to sentence 2 of chapter 2.
Guys, this is the greatest cinematic achievement of all time, and we need to give it the honor it's due.
Yeah.
Yes.
Poor Jim Theis died in 2002. We need to honor his memory by definitely not mercilessly mocking
You hear that?
something he did as a teenager.
These pages are haunted.
And
so
died
do relax.
regretting, right?
Yes. Not a joke.
I know.
Not a joke. He hated it,
I'm
and
not
he was really
laughing.
pissed that everybody made fun of it.
Not a joke.
All right, we're just going.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
It's your turn.
The red-haired giant strode into the dimly lit hostelry, reeking of foul odors and cheap wine. The air was heavy with chalking fumes spewing from smoldering torches encased within Theoden's earthen-packed walls. Tables were clustered with groups of drunken thieves and cutthroats, tossing dice or making love to willing prostitutes.
What's the willing prostitute?
Consent.
Lame. Eyeing a slender female crouched alone at a nearby bench, Grignr advanced, wishing to wholesomely occupy his time. The flickering torches cast weird shafts of luminescence dancing over the half-naked harlot of his choice, her stringy, orchid twines of hair swaying gracefully over the lithe, opaque nose as she as she raised a half-drained mug to her pale red lips. Glancing upward, the alluring complexion noted the stalwart giant as he rapidly approached. A faint glimmer sparked from the pair of deep blue ovals of the amorous female as she motioned toward Grignr, enticing him to join her. The barbarian seated himself upon a stool at a wench's side. As the wench's side.
That's not a real mistake, though. Keep going.
Exposing
gotta
his
get
body, naked save for a loincloth, brandishing a long steel broadsword, an iron spiraled battle helmet, and a thick leather sandals to her
Thick leather sandals.
to her unobstructed view.
You said it right.
Thou hast needed to occupy your time, barbarian, questioned the female. Only in
Alright, laughing is reasonable.
That was good though.
Alright, that's solid, that's solid.
Where?
Oh yeah,
So
what
you have
was
to
the...
start
A
with.
female?
Yeah.
I guess right after
I
that, yeah.
completed that, but I laughed.
Yeah. I'd say you completed it then. If you made it to the end of
Yeah.
that, then yeah.
And there was the questioning tone in your voice. I think that was
Right.
appropriate.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Only if something worth offering is within my reach, stated Grignr, as his hands crept to embrace the tempting female, who welcomed them with open willingness. From where do you come, barbarian, and by what are you called? Gasped the complying wench, as Grignr smothered her lips with the blazing touch of his flaming mouth. The engrossed titan ignored the queries of the inquisitive female, pulling her towards him and crushing her sagging nipples to his yearning chest. Without struggle, she gave in, winding her soft arms around the harshly bronzed hide of Grignr corded shoulder blade
She made it
as his calloused hands caressed her firm, protruding busts. You make love well, wench, admitted Grignr as he reached for the vessel of potent wine his charge had been quaffing. A flying foot caught the mug Grignr had taken hold of, sending its blood-red contents sloshing over a flickering crescent, leashing tongues of bright orange flame to the foot-trodden floor. Remove yourself, sirrah. The wench belongs to me, blabbered a drunken soldier, too far consumed by the influences of his virile brew to take note of the superior size of his adversary. Grignr lithely bounded from the startled female, his face lit up to an ashen red ferocity and eyes locked in a searing feral blaze toward the swaying soldier. To hell with you, braggart, bellowed an angered accordion as he hefted his finely honed broadsword. The staggering soldier clumsily reached towards the pommel of his dangling sword, but before his hands ever touched the oaken hilt, a silvered flash was slicing the heavy air. The thews of the savage's lashing right arm bulged from the glistening bronzed hide as his blade bit deeply into the soldier's neck. loping off the confused head of his senseless tormentor. With a nauseating thud, the severed oval toppled to the floor as the segregated torso of Grignr's bovine antagonist swayed, then collapsed in a pool of swirled crimson. In the confusion, the soldiers' fellows confronted Grignr with unsheathed cutlasses directed toward the latter's scowling makeup. The slut should have picked his quarry more carefully, roared the victor in a mocking baritone growl as he wiped his dripping blade on the prostrate form and returned it to its scabbard.
Very well done.
You're made for this. Also, as soon as you said the word bovine, that changed the whole scene for me. I'm like, that dude just killed the cow.
Does not take place in India.
You have to.
Yep.
You might start to notice some subtle sexual metaphor. I don't know if you got it.
Guys, subtle.
The dangling pommels and silver.
Yeah, I wasn't
actually
sure.
wrong. Like, I think if you ignore the typos and some questionable word choices, this is a brilliant work of art. You gotta reach for not what he said,
This is
but
like
what
The
he
Room.
meant.
It's like a surrealist painting. You're just looking at it, it's like, what the fuck? That's all fucked up. Oh, but what if like, all right.
Okay.
It's bad.
Or it's bad. Who can say? We don't have experts.
Who can
can't
say
say
if
anything.
this story's good? Read.
Read!
The fool should have shown more prudence, however you shall rue your actions while rotting in the pits, stated one of the sprawled soldiers' comrades. Grignr's hand began to remove his blade from its leather housing, but retarded the motion in the face of the blades waving before his face. Dismiss your hand from the hilt, barbarian, or you shall find a foot of steel sheathed in your gizzard.
Barbarian?
Grignr weighed his position, observing his plight, whereupon he took the soldier's advice as the only logical choice. To attempt to hack his way from his present predicament could only warrant certain death. He was of no mind to bring upon his own demise if an alternate path presented itself. The will to necessitate his life forced him to yield to the superior forces in hope of a Damn it.
Oh.
It's like such a continuous sentence.
The will to necessitate? Is that it?
Yeah.
Is that an illustration?
It is.
Yes.
It looks like Doctor Strange.
It doesn't have eyes.
Looks like Doctor Strange in the fucking thing. I'll put it up in the video. Alright.
But they forgot the eyes.
The will to necessitate his life forced him to yield to the superior force in hopes of a moment of carlessness later upon the part of his captors in which he could effect a more plausible means of escape. You may steady your arms, I will go without a struggle. Your decision is a wise one, yet perhaps you would have been better off had you forced death. The soldier's mouth wrinkled to a sadistic grin of knowing mirth as he prodded his prisoner on with his sword point. After an indiscriminate period of marching through slinking alleyways and dim moonlighted streets, the procession confronted a massive seraglio. The palace area was surrounded by an iron grating with a lush garden upon all sides. The group was admitted through the gilded gateway, and Grignr was led along a stone pathway bordered by plush vegetation. I'm an idiot. That's how vegetation is actually spelled. No, it isn't.
No, it is not.
Vegetation.
Where?
Right where your finger is, just left. Left.
I think
left.
that's wrong.
That's spelled wrong.
It is.
Yeah.
VGE. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy then.
I just
Alright.
think that.
I shouldn't be
It's like
second guessing. It's up to
vegetable.
you to call me on it. I shouldn't be stopping. But
Well, yeah, that's why you messed it up.
We put
Just
it
finish it. Just keep going.
Wow.
My plush vegetation, lustfully enhanced by the moon's shivering rays. Upon reaching the palace, the group was granted entrance, and after several minutes of explanation, led through several winding corridors to a richly draped chamber. Confronting the group was a short, stocky man seated upon a golden throne. Tapestries of richly draped regal blue silk covered all walls of the chamber, while the steps leading to the throne were plated with sparkling white ivory. The man upon the throne had a naked wench seated at each of his arms, and a trusted advisor seated in back of him. At each corner of the chamber, a guard stood at attention, with upraised pikes supported in their hands, golden chainmail adorning their torsos, and barred helmets emitting scarlet plumes enshrouding their heads. The man rose from his throne to the dais surrounding it, his plush turquoise robe dangled loosely from his chunky frame. The soldiers surrounding Grignr fell to their knees with heads bowed to the stone masonry of the floor in fearful dignity to their sovereign, liege.
Crushing.
This isn't a pause, I have like half a paragraph to go.
Do you only have one hand right now?
Yes.
You can use two.
How about we swap? It's easier.
Done. Hey.
Clever girl.
Explain the purpose of this intrusion upon my chateau. Your serenity, resplendent in noble grandeur, we have brought this yokel before you, the soldier gestured toward Grignr, for the redress of all... No. Damn it, so... One line.
Can I see an illustration from the previous page?
Yeah.
Imagine Doctor Strange, and that's basically
Just
it.
imagine the illustration.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Doctor Stranger.
Your serenity, I believe.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay.
It's YouTube. I can't say shit.
Your
I think you can.
serenity, resplendent in noble grandeur, we have brought this yokel before you, the soldier gestured toward Grignr, for the redress or your all-knowing wisdom in judgment regarding his fate. Down on your knees, lout, and pay proper homage to your sovereign, commanded the pudgy noble of Grignr. By the surly beard of Brifk, Grignr kneels to no man, scowled the massive barbarian. You dare to deal this blasphemous act to me? You are indeed brave stranger, yet your valor smacks of foolishness. I find you to be the only fool sitting upon your pompous throne and hinting the rolling flabs of your belly in the midst of your elaborate luxuriant. The soldier standing at Grignr's side smote him heavily in the face with the flat of his sword, cutting short the harsh words and knocking his battered helmet to the masonry with an echoing clang. The paunchy noble's sagging round face flushed suddenly pale, then hastily lit up to a lustrous cherry red radiance. His lips trembled with malicious rage while emitting a muffled sibilant gibberish. His sagging flaps rolled like
laughing.
You're laughing.
No laughing.
You're giggling.
You laugh?
Yes, you
Laugh.
can't
Doesn't
laugh
matter.
at all.
Can't laugh.
That was awesome.
No,
Yes.
you were awesome. That was great.
It's all,
but
you
you
know what
laughed.
it is.
You gotta
It's all
control
sibilant
yourself.
gibberish.
Right.
The whole story is sibilant gibberish.
See how your side.
Muffled sibilant gibberish.
Now that we've made it around since I got here and witnessed this hot mess,
Yeah.
does
That's
anyone
pretty much the
know
beginning.
what the story's about?
No.
Okay, good.
It's not about that.
It's
Felice.
about the Eye of Argon.
So far, I've understood the barbarian got somewhere.
Yeah.
He's got to a
And
point.
he's
been captured.
He
Maybe
attempted
just
to
got
have
killed.
sex.
How
Yeah,
many
he killed the
pages?
bovine and he fucked the wench.
Lots
Yeah.
of naked
He
wenches.
fucked his woman and he killed a wench.
Yeah.
No, he wanted to have sex with the wench, and then somebody else argued with him, and he killed that guy.
And
Yeah.
he was bovine.
And
Now
his
he's being
oval
crushed.
fell
He's
to the
picturing
floor.
how now is in Doctor Strange's house, and he's getting smacked around.
Because
from
Doctor
here
Strange
to
Is
the-
this
the
fat guy happy or
illustration.
sad?
Yeah, get
angry.
some.
He's
Get some.
angry because
I'm
Grignr
honest.
made fun of him.
I'm starting with sagging flaps.
Some of the punching noble. Yeah.
What? Did I steal some of this?
No, you can finish that sentence.
No, but I think you have to go all the way
You
back.
have to go back to the start of the sentence. Not the paragraph, just the
Yeah,
sentence.
so sagging flaps.
Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead.
He's making me giggle. He's just giggling. It's funny.
Emitting a muffled sibilant gibberish.
Now we got a title.
Good.
Breathe all the
That's
time.
gotta be it.
Yeah, it's so perfect.
His sagging flabs rolled like a tub of upset jelly, then compressed as he sucked in his gut in an attempt to conceal his
I do
softness.
that every day.
The prince regained his statue, then spoke to the soldiers surrounding Grignr, his face conforming to an ugly expression of sadistic humor. Take this uncouth heathen to the vault of misery, and be sure that his agonies are long and drawn out before death can release him. As you wish, sire. Your command shall be heeded immediately, answered the soldier on the right of Grignr as he stared into the barbarian's seemingly unaffected face. The advisor, seated in the back of the noble, slowly rose and advanced to the side of his master, motioning the wenches seated at his sides to remove themselves. He lowered his head and whispered to the noble, "Eminence, the punishment you have decreed will cause such misery to this scum."
Much. Keep going.
What?
Yet it will last only a short time, then release him to a land beyond the sufferings of the human body. Why not mellow him in one of the subterranean vaults for a few days, then send him to a life labor in one of your buried mines? To one such as he, a life spent in the confinement of the Stygian pits will be an infinitely more appropriate and lasting torture.
Smooth.
The noble cupped his drooping double chin in the folds of his briming palm, meditating for a moment upon the rationality of the counselor's words, then raised his shaggy brown eyebrows and turned toward his advisor, eyes aglow.
His counselor's words. You good?
If it's
No,
messed
you
up,
gotta
that's
call out
the
stuff
that's
like
the whole
that.
point.
That wasn't messed up.
Okay.
You're just interrupting me.
No, I'm just telling, like, you should have pronounced that word is, because it's a contraction that shouldn't have been there.
Then he did it wrong.
That's right. Yeah. Then,
Would
then
you
that's
pronounce
how
it?
you keep going. Then now.
I mean,
pass it.
I guess I'm asking, right? So
No,
internet
if
audience,
if
like,
it's spelled the
like it's
silent wrong, you have to put a
counselor's
little
That's
word
the
in
words.
there.
Like you see this.
That's
right
words
here?
with an apostrophe.
It's the counselor's
Right,
word.
right.
They put an apostrophe in there. You or I probably
should-
would have pronounced it differently because of that error.
You probably do want to. Yeah. If there's a clear mistake,
Is
you
that
want
a
to
call?
like,
Is that-
enunciate the mistake. I would
But he
say
did
we-
say words, so it could go either way.
Well, you're supposed to pronounce the bad punctuation.
Oh, I forgot someone else was here.
Is there some?
Jesus.
I think we're splitting hairs at this
Lindsay's
point.
goes. Yeah, keep going, CJ, but I'll call you on your next.
All right. I'll keep that in mind.
That's where Tom
Going forward.
had her.
That's what I said like 2 hours ago.
Yeah, nobody listened.
Look, guys, Lindsay's here.
Lindsay
Oh,
fell out of the
I'm
basement.
Bless
Bless
you.
you.
How dare you?
Okay, so
Yeah.
we got two.
Let me get
Allergic.
Yeah, well, I'm just
Back to it.
allergic to Lindsay.
Yeah, it's
As always, accountant, you speak with great wisdom. Your words ring of great knowledge concerning the nature of one such as he, saith the king. The noble turned toward the prisoner with a noticeable shimmer reflecting in his frog-like eyes and his lips contorting to a greasy grin. I have decided to void my previous decree. The prisoner shall be removed to one of the palace's underground vaults. There he shall stay until I have decided that he has sufficiently simmered, whereupon he is to be allowed to spend the remainder of his days at labor in one of my mines. Upon hearing this, Grignr realized that his fate would be far less merciful than death to one such as he, who is used to roaming the countryside at will. A life of confinement would be more than his body and mind could stand up to. This type of life would be immeasurably worse than death. I shall never understand the ways of your twisted civilization. I simply defend my honor and am condemned to life confinement by a pig who sits on his royal ass wooing whores and knows nothing of the affairs of the land he imagines to rule. Lectures, Grignr? Enough of this!
Was that the narrator?
Away with the slut before I loose my control.
Yeah.
That's my page.
Yeah, I've loved this forever.
I know.
Did you win?
Yeah, you win if you do a
gotta
whole
Get through a
full
whole
page.
page. There's a goal.
Yeah.
So I'm right here?
And you did it?
He did it.
Oh, I started earlier and then we broke and then I finished.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
But thank you. You're up after Ben.
Oh,
Yeah. Good luck.
Seeing the peril of his position, Grignr searched for an opening. Crushing prudence to the sward, he plowed into the soldier at his left arm, taking hold of his sword, and bounding to the dais supporting the prince before the startled guards could regain their composure. Agafund leaped Grignr and his sire.
His name is Agnes.
So
I need you to be okay.
I can't laugh. I need to start at the beginning of the
And
sentence.
you can't mispronounce anything.
And you have to pronounce things
I
as
have to
written,
mispronounce
good or
the
bad.
mispronunciation.
This
I was
includes
actually
punctuation.
conscious when
On
I heard
camera.
that at the beginning.
Includes punctuation. I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I'm having too much of a good time. I'll never
Alright.
make it through more than
Real
like 3
hard.
sentences.
You're like
You're
shut
having too much
everybody
cream soda there,
Oh,
man.
yeah.
Easy killer.
Agafund leaped to Grignr and his sire, but found a sword blade permeating the length of his ribs before he could loose his weapon. The counselor slumped to his knees as Grignr slid his crimsoned blade from Agafund's rib cage. The fat prince stood undulating in insurmountable
Wasn't he a
fear
king?
before the edge of the fiery man comet, his flabs of jelly blubber pulsating to and fro in ripples
feels
of
personal.
flowing terror. Where's your wisdom and your power now, your majesty? growled Grignr. The prince went rigid as Grignr discerned him. I can't do it, no.
That was solid though. That seemed like a dead paragraph.
You're so
Oh my god, Majesty was
Go
the
back to the beginning of the sentence.
Majesty.
it was a delayed reaction, so I couldn't deal with it.
This is gonna be rough.
Breathe. Just breathe through.
Oh, I'm so keep going. Nope, just go, please.
Don't worry.
Great.
There's an amazing part coming out.
The prince went rigid as Grignr discerned him glazing over his shoulder. He slipped to note the cause of the noble's attention, raised his sword over his head, and prepared to leash a vicious downward cleft, but fell short as the haft of a steel-rimed pike clashed against his unguarded skull.
Oh.
Then blackness and solitude. Silence and shrouding and ever
That'll
peaceful reigned supreme.
Proud of him.
Am I good?
Yeah, you're not laughing. You're not laughing.
You're different before me, sirrah. Before me as always. Ha 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 ha. Nobly cackled.
Nobly.
Oh no! Nobly?
Nobly has an E in it.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Nope.
Which one?
What? It doesn't?
Nope.
I
Nobly is
can't
NOBLY.
spell.
Alright, we'll look at our Scrabble dictionary later. Keep going.
Knobbly would have a K.
Nobly would have two B's.
That's true.
Consciousness returned to Grignr in stigmatic pools as his mind gradually cleared of the cobwebs cluttering its inner recesses. Yet the Stygian cloud of charcoal ebony remained, an incompatible shield of blackness enhanced by the bleak absence of sound.
What?
Grignr's muddled
He's
brain
unconscious.
reeled from the shock of the blow he had received to the base of his skull. The events leading to his predicament were slow to filter back to him. He dickered with the notion.
Dickered in there.
Whoever was going to get
you
that
I meant K like in Dora.
Oh.
No laughing.
I'm not gonna.
That.
I'm good when I have the page in front of me. Alright.
You're gonna do a Russian accent?
No, that might keep me more serious. I don't know.
I just
It's
feel like it's
helping.
hard with the other
I don't
mispronunciation
know.
thing.
Yeah, no,
Look at that,
I'm
get
gonna
me
keep
through this.
it. Okay. He dickered with the notion that he was dead and had descended or sunk, however it may be, to the shadowed land beyond the aperture of the grave, but rejected this hypothesis when his memory sifted back within his grips. This was not the land of the dead. It was something infinitely more precarious than anything the grave could offer. Death promised an infinity of peace, not the finite misery of an inactive life of confined torture, forever concealed from the life-bearing shafts of the beloved rising sun. Sorry, I went back up one.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. The orb that had been before taken for granted, yet now cherished above all else, to be forever refused further glimpses of the snow-capped summits of the land of his birth, never again to witness the thrill of plundering unexplored lands beyond the crest of a bleeding horizon, and perhaps worst of all, the denial to ever again encompass the lustful excitement of caressing the naked curves of the body of a trim, yound wench.
So fucking young.
This was indeed one of the buried chasms of hell, concealed within the inner depths of the palace's despised interior. A fearful ebony chamber devised to drive to the brinks of insanity the minds of the unfortunately condemned through the inapt solitude of a limbo of listless, dreary silence. 3.5.
What?
Why is it chapter
3.5?
3.5.
Unreal.
A tightly rung elliptical circle or torches cast their wavering shafts prancing
What?
morbidly
Or
over the
torches?
surface
Oh, I meant
of a rectangular ridged altar. Expertly
I
chiseled
speak
forms of grotesque gargoyles graced the oblique rim, protuberating the length of the grim orifice of death, staring forever ahead into nothingness in complete ignorance of the bloody rites enacted in their presence. Brown flaking stains decorated the golden surface of the ridge surrounding the altar, which banked to a small slit at the lower right-hand corner of the altar. The slit stood above a crudely pounded pail, which had several silver-meshed chalices hanging at its sides. Dangling, he loves that word, at the rim of a golden mallet, the handle of which was engraved with images of twisted faces and groved at its far end with slots designed for a snug hand grip. The head of the mallet was slightly larger than a clenched fist and shaped into a smooth oval mass. Encircling the marble altar was a congregation of leering shaman, eerie chants of a bygone age originating unknown eons before the memory of man were being uttered from the buried recesses of the acolyte's deep lings.
That's almost a cool sentence. Like,
Deep
there's
lings?
something
Deep
here.
lings?
No, before that. Like, there's almost a good story here. It's not, but he's trying. He's like almost there.
I feel like you're trying.
Maybe.
Really hard.
Maybe I just relate to this guy because I'm a terrible writer. And I'm like, he's good, guys. He's good.
Continue.
He wrote this in the 70s.
Orange paint was smeared in generous globules over the top of the priest's wrinkled shaven scalps,
I take it all back. I'm sorry.
while golden rings projected from the lobes of their pink ears. Ornate robes of lusure, purple satin, enclosed their bulging torsos, attached around their waists with silvered silk lashes latched with ebony buckles in the shape of morose, misshaped skulls. Dangling around their necks were oval-fashioned medallions held by thin gold chains featuring in their centers blood-red rubies which resembled crimson fetish eyeballs.
What are those?
Cushioning their bare feet were plush red felt slippers with pointed golden spikes projecting from their tips.
Very well done.
Wow, you're really good at sucking.
Thanks.
Wow.
No, I didn't mean like that. I just meant reading a bad book.
I'm really glad that I got
Sorry.
some like good
Sorry.
words,
No, it's
like
fine.
That was
thwomp.
that was fantastic. I was wondering how you pronounce that.
Wait, let me find it.
Cushions?
Oh, beautiful.
I
How
thought-
could I forget their red felt slippers with
Right?
projecting golden spikes? Go on.
I really want fetish.
Situated in front of the altar and directly adjacent to the copper pail was a massive jade idol, a misshaped, hideous bust of the shaman's pagan deity. The shimmering green idol was placed in a sitting posture on an ornately carved golden throne raised upon a round, debris-plated dais, its bulging arms and webbed hands resting on the padded arms of the seat. Its head was entwined in golden snake-like coils hanging over its oblong ears, which tapered off to thin hollow points. Its nose was a bulging triangular mass, sunken in at its sides with cow-gaping nostrils. Dramatic beneath the nostrils was a twisted, shaggy-lipped mouth, giving the impression of a slavering, sadistic grimace. At the foot of the heathen deity was a slender, pale-faced female, naked but for a golden jeweled harness enshrouding her huge, outcropping breasts. Supporting long silver laces which extended to her thigh, stood before the pearl-white field with noticeable shivers traveling up and down the length of her exquisitely molded body. Her delicate lips trembled beneath soft, narrow hands as she attempted to conceal herself from the piercing stare of the ambivalent idol. Glaring directly down towards her was the stony, cycloptic face of the bloated deity. Gaping from its single obling socket was a scintillating, many-faceted scarlet emerald, a brilliant gem seeming to possess a life all of its own. A priceless, gleaming stone, capable of domineering the wealth of conquering empires. The Eye of Argon.
Shit!
4.
Why is it a different font than the rest?
Also, don't question these things. Eye of Argon was mentioned in 3.5. Important chapter. That's all.
Our bad.
I'm just imagining the many-faceted Jim of literally being like,
Ruby
"Hey,
Emerald.
Emerald, what's
Don't
your-"
Many-faceted ruby emerald. Emerald.
Yeah, Scarlet Emerald.
Scarlet Emerald, excuse me. Anyway.
Man.
4. All knowledge of measuring time had escaped Grignr. When a person is deprived of the sun, moon, and stars, he loses all conception of time as he had previously understood it. It seemed as if years had passed if time were being measured by terms of misery and mental anguish, yet he estimated that his stay had only been a few days in length. He has slept 3 times and had been fed 5 times since his awakening in the crypt. However, when the actions of the body are restricted, its needs are also affected. The need for nourishment and slumber are directly proportional to the functions the body has performed, meaning that when free and active, Grignr may become hungry every 6 hours and witness the desire for sleep every 15 hours, whereas in his present condition he may encounter the need for food every 10 hours.
Oh my God!
Every 20
Married
hours.
to 2
All
and...
methods had been before depended upon were extinct in the dismal pit. Hence he may have been
good book.
imprisoned for 10 minutes or 10 years. He did not know, resulting in a
10 years, really?
emotion deep within his being.
Instead of 15 hours without food, it might be 20 hours without food, so it could be 10 years.
Yeah. Did you guys think Grignr was smart?
One more paragraph, guys. One more paragraph.
I'm just trying to figure out how to figure out where the pages be ending.
Well, that's
It's
about,
where-
about the
it's
same
about the
point down the
spot.
page. So I
It's
think
about
one
roughly
more
where you started
paragraph
on.
and then I'm good, right?
That makes
Yeah.
sense. That sounds good.
The food, if you can honor the moldering lumps of fetid mush to that extent, was borne to him by 2 guards who opened a portal at the top of his enclosure and shoved it to him in wooden bowls, retrieving the food and water bowels from his previous meal at the same time.
That's a really
After which
unfortunate.
they threw back the bolts on the iron latch and returned to their other duties. Since deprived of all other means of nourishment, Grignr was impelled to eat the tainted slop in order to warn off the pangs of starvation, though as he stuffed it into his mouth with his filthy fingers and struggled to force it down his throat, he imagined it was that which
That's a laugh. That's a laugh.
You're literally going up to halfway back into that paragraph.
And you make this
I'll just take that one.
Yeah, that was
breathe again, man. Come on, you're killing me.
Are there any pages that are also sentences in this book?
Not whole pages, but some pages are like 4 sentences.
I'm sorry.
Alright. You have to leave that a little bit.
Oh my god.
Went from bowels into duties.
I mean, we're all 11 here, so...
When I walked in, I was thinking, look at all of the shirts we're wearing. We're a group of 5-year-olds from 1984. Like,
Do you not like flannels?
no, I love the Ninja Turtles.
Literally,
Like
I'm
Ninja
couch,
Turtles,
right
Mickey Mouse, bunch of video games.
Flannel Brothers.
I got dressed
Flannels.
by my mom.
Yes.
She likes pink.
I'm wearing a shirt I wore to a bachelor party.
Hey.
I'm very lonely.
Cool. We all know, John. It's okay.
I'm good.
So you're taking it back to the beginning of the
Since deprived.
Yep,
I believe.
okay.
Alright. Since deprived of all other means of nourishment, Grignr was impelled to eat the tainted slop in order to ward off the pains of starvation, though as he stuffed it into his mouth with his filthy fingers and struggled to force it down his throat, he imagined it was that which had been spurned by the hound stationed at the various segments of the palace.
Ooh, there was an extra the in there.
Keep going.
There was little in the Bayron vault that could occupy his body or mind. He had paced out the length and width of the enclosure time and time again and tested every granite
That's what he
slab,
does for fun.
which consisted the walls of the prison, in hopes of finding a hidden passage to freedom, all of which was to no avail other than to keep him busy and distract his mind from wandering to thoughts of what he believed was his future. He had memorized the number of strides from one end to the other of the cell, and he knew the exact number of slabs which had made...
They
Fuck,
already
I'm
said
adding
that.
all over the
Words
place,
all
yeah.
over the place.
Yeah.
No, pass that shit.
You're too smart for this.
There were like 3 words added in that sentence right there.
I can't wait till we hear about how many times he jacked it today, because I feel like he's really like worried about not having women.
It was 90,000 times in 10 years.
Or 12 minutes.
Or
Who can know?
He had
I like how it
memorized.
says I think it's 3 days and then went on to describe
Like,
got
oh
that
no!
The math there was questionable. He had memorized the number of strads from one end to the other of the cell and knew the exact number of slabs which made up the bleak dungeon. Numerous schemes were introduced and alternately discarded in turn as they succored to unravel to him no means of escape which stood the slightest chance of success. And which continued to mount as his means of occupation were rapidly exhausted. Suddenly, without no time. What's a time?
I'm gonna guess
Suddenly,
motive.
without no time.
I'm assuming it's motive, but that's just me.
He had no time. Go ahead.
Right at the bottom.
No time, I know where we are.
Did I not say it enough times?
No time.
No time.
Breathe, Ben. Breathe.
Do we need to go to commercial? Do we need to go to
No, it's fine.
Your ad
You're
here.
gonna have to hear it again now. You're gonna.
Right
Suddenly.
over John's face.
Without no time, he was routed from his contemplations as he detected a faint scratching sound at the end of the crypt opposite him. The sound seemed to be caused by something trying to scrape away at the granite blocks the floor of the enclosure consisted of. The sandy scratching of something like an animal's claws. Grignr gradually groped his way to the other end of the vault, carefully feeling his way along with his hands ahead of him.
Sure did.
When a few inches from the wall, a loud, penetrating squeal and the scampering of small padded feet reverberated from the walls of the roughly hewn chamber. Grignr threw his hands up to shield his face and flung himself backwards upon his buttocks. A fuzzy foam bounded to his hairy chest,
It was a triple.
burying its talons in his flesh while gnashing toward his throat with its grinding white teeth. It's sour.
I'm totally right.
Corpsing the screaming barbarian's dilated nostrils.
None of those words are right. You did great. Go on.
Grappled with the lashing flexor muscles of the repugnant body of a gargantuan gownated rat, striving to hold its razor teeth from his juicy jugular as its beady grey organs of sight blaze into the flaring emeralds of its prey.
Oh my god.
Good God.
Taking hold of the rodent around its lean, growling stomach with both hands, Grignr pried it from his crimson-rent breast, removing small patches of flayed flesh from his chest in the motion between the squalid black claws of the starving beast. Holding the rodent at arm's length, he cupped his right hand over his frothing face, contracting his fingers into a vice-like fist over the quivering head. Retaining the grips on the rat, Grignr flexed his outstretched arms while slowly twisting his right hand clockwise and his left hand counterclockwise motion. The rodent let out a tortured squall, drowning.
That's a regular word. That's a normal word. That was right. You were so good at the bad words that good words threw you off.
You got too used to the words.
Just try. Just try.
Yes, half of this chapter is entirely about him killing a rat and nothing else.
Oh my lord.
In prison.
I like this.
We're gonna counterclockwise motion and a clockwise motion. You gotta know about the
Beady
twisting
gray
of it.
organs of
Of
sight.
sight.
Not eyes.
Nope.
Organs
No,
of
you gotta go with the fantasy language. Organs of sight.
This is
No.
so
I'm gonna get
hard.
a thesaurus and like checked
I
off
hope you're
every
ready
word
to
he
read,
used
'cause I'm
once
not gonna
except
put it very
over
far.
and dangling.
Oh, bulging's another one.
Groping.
That side takes a long time. This side goes real
There
quick.
was so much alliteration in that part.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, that was
Great
tough.
Grignr Grinkin the Grox.
Rocking, yeah.
I can't believe I lost it.
Gronkowski.
Still the
It's a
sea
good,
bag.
it's a good try, man. It's a good
I
try.
like a drow and like
The rodent let out a tortured squall, drawing scarlet as it violently dug its foam-flecked fangs into the barbarian's sweating palm, causing his face to contort to an ugly grimace as he cursed beneath his breath. With a loud...
It's brave. CJ, man, nothing gets past CJ.
Fizz bombs, man.
My brain was just like,
You've been doing this since 8th grade, you
That's
son of
the
a bitch.
danger.
He corrected my spelling test in 8th grade and he called me out.
Went in front of
My
the teacher.
best friend.
No, he
marked me wrong.
Friends
'cause
help
my-
friends cheat, and he called me out on a real mistake, so I call him out on bad penmanship.
So conspicuous became conspizvavs because he thought I could.
These look like these.
You had to be there.
I even know that word.
We say it a
Because
lot.
it's not a word.
Most of
Okay.
us weren't there in our 8th grade English class.
I like that
Sorry.
you two were.
We were. I'm also talking into a camera that I just realized is completely
So,
dead.
Everyone's wondering why we switched to one camera
Woo!
after and a half.
I guess you got through it. I mean, you mispronounced Braith, but.
Consensus?
Braith was
You
the error,
start
so you start
after
the sentence that involves Braith.
Okay, so that's the same spot.
Yeah, you're supposed to
Yeah.
finish the sentence.
That's,
That will
that's
happen,
the
that will
danger,
happen.
yes.
Alright, so here we go. The rodent let out a tortured squall, drawing scarlet as it violently dug its foam-flecked fangs into the barbarian's sweating palm, causing his face to contort to an ugly grimace as he cursed beneath his braith.
There we go.
With a loud crack, the rodent's head parted from its squirming torso, sending out a sprinkle.
That's like immediately.
I'm really bad at this.
On the plus side, Ian doesn't have to start with a sentence with Braith.
Hey!
But it's a sprinking shower.
Good luck to Ian then.
Drinking shower.
Good luck to Ian.
Yeah, he's like, we're ready, let's do this.
I'm gonna send this to all your students just so you know.
Oh, great, thanks.
So I'm all
Story or the video?
I should probably eat
Both
something.
video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least drink some soda. Up the blood sugar.
Yeah.
Where am I?
With a
Sprinking
loud
shit.
crack.
Where am I? It's the one after Braith. Alright, this is going to not go well.
You got
Just
this.
read it,
I'm
you can
sorry.
do this.
You got this.
With a loud crack, the rodent's head parted from its squirming torso, sending out a sprinkling shower of crimson gore and trailing a slimy string of disjointed vertebrae, snapped trachea, esophagus, jugular, disjointed hyoid bone,
serious?
morose purpled stretched hide, and blood-seared muscles.
That's really significant. Alright, okay.
Would be enough.
Right, yeah, no, it's very poetic. Flinging the broken body to the floor, Grignr shook his blood-streaked hands and wiped them against his thigh until dry, then wiped the blood that had showered his face and from his eyes. Again sitting himself upon the jagged floor, he prepared to once more revamp his glum meditations. He told himself that as long as he still breathed the gust of life through his lungs, hope was not lost. He told himself this, but found it hard to comprehend in his gloomy surroundings. Yet he was still alive, his bulging sinews at their peak of marvel, his struggling mind floating in a myriad of impressed excellence of thought. Plot after plot sifted through his mind in energetic contemplations.
So probably not 10 years.
Then it hit him. Minutes may have passed in silent thought or days, he could not tell, but he stumbled at last upon a plan that he considered as holding a slight margin of plausibility.
I've never been prouder of you.
He might die in the attempt, but he knew he would not submit without a final bloody struggle. It was not a foolproof plan, yet it built up a store of renewed vortexed energy in his overwrought soul. Though he might perish in the execution of the escape, he would still be escaping the life of infinite torture in store for him. Either way, he would still cheat the gloating prince of the succored revenge his sadistic mind craved so dearly. The guards would soon come to bear him off to the prince's buried mines of dread, giving him the sought-after opportunity to execute his newly formulated plan. Groping his way along the rough floor, Grignr finally found his tool in a pool of congealed gore, the carcass of the decapitated rodent, the tool that the very filth he had been sentenced to spawned. When the time came for action, he would have to be prepared, so he set himself to rending the sticky hulk in grim silence, searching by the touch of his fingertips for the lever to freedom.
The lever.
I got the lever to freedom right here.
How far am I going? Let's
you
start.
wanna-
Three.
Yeah, like
I
one or
would say
two more
you
paragraphs.
probably have 2 more paragraphs.
Yeah,
Alright.
those two small ones.
5.
Up to the altar and be done with it, wench, ordered a fidgeting shaman as he gave the female a grim stare accompanied by the wrinkling of his lips to a mirthful grin of delight.
I'm gonna try it.
I'm imagining a fidget spinner shaman.
The girl burst into a slow, steady whimper, stooping shakily to her knees and cringing woefully from the priest with both arms wound snake-like around the bulging jade shin right.
Not with the JJ. That was the proudest I ever been of you.
Bulging JJ.
You gotta watch out for the bulging JJ, man.
Okay.
The bulging jade.
Damn it!
The girl burst into a slow, steady whimper, stooping shakily to her knees and cringing woefully from the priest with both arms wound snake-like around the bulging jade shin, rising before her scantily attired figure. Her face was redly inflamed from the salty flow of tears spouting from her glassy, dilated eyeballs. With short, heavy footfalls, the priest approached the female, his piercing stare never wavering from her quivering young countenance. Halting before the terrified girl, he projected his arm outward and motioned her to arise with an upward movement of his hand. The girl's whimpering increased slightly, and she sunk closer to the floor rather than arising.
How dare she?
The flickering torches outlined her trim build with a weird ornate glow as it cast a ghostly shadow dancing in horrid waves of splendor over smoothly worn whiteness of the marble-hewn altar. The shaman's lips curled back farther, exposing a set of blackened, decaying molars which transformed his slovenly grin into a wide, greasy arc of sadistic mirth, and alternately interposed into the female a strong sensation of stomach-curdling nausea. Have it as you will, female, gloated the enhanced priest.
Enhanced?
Yeah,
As he
female.
bent over at the waist,
It's
projecting
Jorgensen.
his ape-like arms forward and clasped the female's slender arms with his hairy round fists. With an inward surge of his biceps, he harshly jerked the trembling...
No, stop.
I got
and punching both arms at the same time?
No, he's like
I
doing
think it's
this. He's
supposed
like,
to be a
No, he grabbed her and he,
her.
with an inward something of his biceps.
no, I think his biceps are telepathically
Inward bulge
moving
of his
her.
bicep.
Okay.
He's
Yeah, with an
very
inward
advanced.
surge is where you're starting.
Okay.
So much,
So
yeah.
almost at the bottom here.
Alright, here we go.
With
Oh
an
my I'm sorry. Somebody yesterday said, "What does he have again?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What does he have?" He's like, "That skin disease. What does he have?" I'm like, "Oh, it's She goes, "Cialysis or Cialis?" And I was like, she's like, "Cialis?
We stopped you right
And
there.
I'm just like, "Oh no." Do you?
It's
mean
psoriasis, but now I'm gonna have Cialis all night long.
And she was like, "No. Oh, then is it cured by Cialis?" And I was like,
If he has it for more than 4 hours, he should contact his doctor.
The skin on your penis begins
Oh.
softening up.
Oh, nice.
"Oh, that's all."
Sorry if that's your life.
This episode title is "The Skin on Your Penis Sloughing Off," or is it just sloughing off?
Above JJ.
Oh, Jade.
That's like up, down, down.
There you go.
With an inward surge of his biceps, he harshly jerked the trembling girl to her feet and smothered her salty, wet cheeks with the moldy touch of his decrepit, dull red lips.
Cheeks
Moldy.
at once?
Yeah.
Just all the face. The vile stench of the shaman's hot, fetid breath overcame the nauseated female with a deep soul-searing sickness, causing her to wrench her head backwards and regurgitate a slimy orange-white stream of swelling gore over the richly woven purple robe of the enthused acolyte.
Was this written by a computer?
Turing test, can you test? The priest's lips trembled with a malicious rage as he removed his callous paws from the girl's arms and replaced them with tightly around her undulating neck, shaking her violently to and fro.
Aww.
The girl gasped a tortured groan from her clamped lungs, her sea blue eyes bulging
scary.
forth from damp sockets. Cocking her right foot backwards, she leashed it desperately outwards with the strength of a demon possessed, lodging her sandaled foot squarely between the shaman's testicles.
Putting her right cock.
You know,
So
I'm
did he
invested
hit
in
any
this
testicles, or was the foot just in between the testicles?
Squarely between the testicles.
Just twisted and kind of sneak in between it.
Very
You're
large
not
gap.
going for damage, you just want to reminded that you're there.
The startled priest released his crushing grip, crimping his body over at the waist, overlooking
Just
his
like
recessed belly, wide open in a deep chasm. His face flushed to a rose-red shade of crimson, eyelids fluttering wide with eyeballs protruding blindly outwards from their sockets to their outmost perimeters, while his lips quivered widely about, allowing an agonized swallow to gust forth as his breath billowed from burning lungs. His hands reached out, clutching his urinary gland as his knees wobbled rapidly about for a few seconds, then buckled, causing the ruptured shaman to collapse in an egg-huddled mass to the granite pavement, rolling helplessly about in his agony. Egg-huddled mass.
Ah! Of
You
course.
The pathetic screeches of the
I'm
shaman.
fucking 30.
He's in an egg huddled mass.
Yeah.
Exhibit A.
What is happening?
Exhibit A.
Yay!
All right.
Teamwork. Let's go.
I know.
The pathetic
It's new to
screeches of the shaman, groveling in dejected misery upon the hand-hewn granite-laid pavement, worn smooth by countless hours of arduous sweat and toil, a welter of ichor oozing through his clenched hands, attracted the perturbed attention of his comrade from their fiated ulations. The actions of this rebellious wench bespoke the credence of an unheard sacrilege. Never before in a lost maze of untold aeons had a chosen one dared to demonstrate such blasphemy in the face of the cult's idolic deity.
Keep going.
I think she saved
The
it.
girl cowered
Yeah.
in unreasoning terror, helpless in the face of the emblazoned acolyte's rage. Her orchid-tussled face smothered betwixt her bulging bosom as she shut her curled lash tightly, hoping to open them and find herself awakening from a morbid nightmare. Yet the hand of destiny decreed her no such mercy. The antagonized pack of leering shaman converging tensely upon her prostrate form were entangled all too lividly in the grim web of reality. Shuddering from the clammy touch of the shaman as they grappled with her supple form, hands wrenching at her slender arms and legs in all directions, her bare body being molested in the labyrinth of orange smudge.
Oh, wait. In
You skipped
the
like
midst
3
of a
words.
I
labyrinth.
did skip the words.
So
That was
close.
like basically where I was
So
done.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Uh,
So you just go to the beginning of the
Yeah,
paragraph
so
because
the
that's how
shot
paragraphs and
right.
sentences work in this story.
Be on it.
Is this me or is that
Alright,
me?
so we
It was
might be-
like
we might be-
practically a whole
We'll be
page.
rapidly cutting in a second.
Okay,
here.
just
It
That's
was
right.
there.
That's
It's basically.
Great.
I'm on track.
I was getting ready because
Can't
like
have
we're
other
about to
fun.
switch pages. Are we good? We good? All
I
right.
know, I'm just
claiming
Yeah. All right. Shuddering from the clammy touch of the shaman as they grappled with her supple form,
Aw, man.
hands wrenching at her slender arms and legs in all directions, her bare body being molested in the midst of a labyrinth of orange smudges, purpled satin, and mangled skulls, shadowed in an eerie crimson glow. Her confused head reeled, then clouded in a mist of enshrouding ebony as she lapsed beneath the protective sheet of unconsciousness to a land peach and resign.
Yes,
Six.
I want to go to there.
To a land peach?
I want
And
to go to
resign.
land peace
Resign.
and resign. Yes.
Land peach sounds good.
Take hold of this rope, said the first soldier, and climb out from your pit, slut. Your presence is requested in another far deeper hellhole.
Is this
If you
Grignr?
know what I mean.
Grignr slipped his right hand to his thigh,
Grignr's a
concealing a
slut.
small, opaque object beneath the folds of the G-string wrapped around his waist.
Now he is.
Whoa!
And it's
This is
about his
amazing.
waist.
What did I say?
Around.
Oh, did I? Oh, shit. All right.
That's a lame
Wow, that was like me.
No,
It was a really not usual type of slip, but
So you gotta go back to Grignr.
I think the G-string on Grignr.
Yeah, I think the
G for
G-string distracted
Grignr.
you.
Alright. Grignr slipped his right hand to his thigh, concealing a small opaque object beneath the folds of the G-string wrapped about his waist. Brine wells swelled in Grignr's cold, jade, squinting eyes, which, grown accustomed to the gloom of the Stygian pools of ebony engulfing him, were bedazzled and blinded by flickering radiance cast forth by the...
Flickering.
Alright, let's do that all again.
Who's the guy who wrote this?
Jim Theis.
Do you think he was a ginger?
What?
with
Probably, because this
eyes.
sucks.
Well, because they're talking
If
about
you rearrange the letters of Grignr, you get ginger.
I had thought of that before. I have no idea.
And he's got red hair, Josh.
yeah, like
Maybe.
like projecting himself.
I like how we've gone from we know description of what he's wearing to G-string.
Yeah.
Right?
It's above his waist. He's not wearing it. It's just like,
Right?
Yeah,
Because-
Wait for the next person to be
It's
declared
only really-
bovine.
yeah.
Oh, that's what.
Okay.
Brine wells swelled in Grignr's cold jade squinting eyes, which, grown accustomed to the gloom of the Stygian pools of ebony engulfing him, were bedazzled and blinded by flickering radiance cast forth by the second soldier's resin torch.
What's that word? Stygian.
Stygian, bulging Stygian.
You know, it's a
Stygian
fun
means
word.
just really dark and
He likes using it.
Oh yeah.
Tightly gripped in the second soldier's right hand, opposite the intermittent torch, was a large double-edged axe, a long leather-wound oaken handle transfixing the center of the weapon's iron head. Adorning the torsos of both of the sentries were thin yet sturdy hauberks, the bread plates of which were woven of tightly hemmed twines of reinforced silver braiding. Cupping the soldiers' feet were thick leather sandals wound about their shins to 2 inches below their knees. Wrapped about their waists were wide satin girdles, with slender bladed poniards dangling loosely from them, the hilts of which featured scarlet encrusted gems.
Oh.
Resting upon the manes of their heads, and reaching midway to their brows, were smooth copper morions.
What are morions?
I don't know, but they're copper.
Spiraling the lower portion of the helmet were short, upcurved silver spikes, while a golden hump spired from the top of each bassinet. Beneath their chins, wound around their necks, and draping their clad shoulders, dangled regal purple satin cloaks, which flowed midway to the soldiers' feet.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't get anything out of that.
No, I was just thinking
I don't
it would be
know,
really
there's
funny
some,
to
weapons.
like
Sounds like a weapon.
draw
like a hat.
what he
That was like a
describes.
cloak.
Right,
Oh, that'd
right.
be
'Cause
great.
what?
That would be like all of us draw
another game.
based on that, yeah, and
That's
then
another
see
game.
what we've all come up with.
That is a
That's
different
not
game,
real,
but
yeah.
it could be fun.
My next paragraph starts with a lowercase h.
I have a couple sentences like that too. Where it's like,
This is a paragraph though.
Oh, so good.
So I don't even know if I just come in. Hand over hand, feet braced against the dank walls of the enclosure, huge Grignr ascended from the moldering depths of the forlorn abyss.
Yes.
His swelled limbs, stiff due to the boredom of a timeless inactivity, compounded by the musty atmosphere and jagged granite protuberant against his body, craved for action. The opportunity now presenting itself
action? I'm
served
so
the purpose of
confused.
oiling his rusty joints and honing his dulled senses.
Oh boy, that was perfect.
He braced himself, facing the second soldier. The sentry's stature was wildly exaggerated in the glare of the flickering crescent cuppix in his right fist. His eyes were wide open in a slightly slanted owlish glaze, enhanced in their sinister intensity by the hawkbill curve of his nose and pale yellow peak of his cheeks. Place your hands behind your back, said the second soldier as he raised his axe over his right shoulder blade and cast it a wavering glance. We must bind your wrists to parry any attempts at escape. Be sure to make the knot a stout one, Roy. We wouldn't want our guest to take leave of our guidance.
I think there's a page, no?
I got a couple more.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a little more.
Alright.
I said 6, so it's moved twice.
Oh,
since
okay.
then.
Broig grasped Grignr's left wrist and reached for the barbarian's right wrist. Grignr wrenched his right arm free and swiveled to face Broig, reached beneath his loincloth with his right hand.
Oh!
The
Why am I
sentry
acting
grappled
this?
at his girdle for the sheathed dagger,
like it.
but recoiled short of his
Dagger.
intentions as Grignr's
Pulled out
right
his
arm
other dagger.
swept to his gorge.
What?
He's reaching
What?
his
Ass?
Is he, what's he doing?
Gorge throat.
Oh, is Gorge throat?
Yeah.
Are you sure
Oh.
it's not vagina?
I feel like.
I thought it was in your front butt.
I thought it was like
Front
his.
butt.
Oh my god, front butt!
But thank you!
That's what my sister used to think.
Yeah, see,
Sluts.
we're made for each other.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Can I pass the pen now or finish the paragraph? Because that was about a page.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Alright, okay.
Okay.
So
Also,
Yeah.
I should just mention the wonderful illustration
Oh,
on the bottom of this
I
page.
couldn't look at it earlier because I was
beautiful.
reading,
Yeah.
but I love it.
Jontron, why?
What is that?
I don't know. It looks like
Let me
Feltor on
Let's
a
find
really
out.
bad
I
day.
was saying, is it like a dog thing? I'm so confused.
Feltor, Feltor,
Oh,
trigger.
unibrow.
I can't wait to hear the description of that in
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
words.
let's get to it.
Right?
The soldier went limp,
Don't
his
laugh.
bobbing eyes rolling beneath fluttering eyelids, a deep welt across his spouting gullet. Without lingering to observe the result of his efforts, Grignr dropped to his knees. The second soldier's axe cleft over Grignr's head in a blizz of silvered ferocity, severing several scarlet locks from his scalp. Coming to rest in his fellow's stomach, the iron head crashed through mail and flesh with splintering force, spilling a pool of crimsoned entrails over the granite paving. Before the sentry could wrench his axe free from his comrade's carcass, he found Grignr's massive hands clasped about his throat, choking the life from his clamped lungs. With the zealous grunt of the accordion flex. Goddamn, why do they call it accordion?
Yeah, I don't understand that. Accordion?
Accordions!
It's not
They're
accordion.
stretchy people.
Yeah, but it's like the accordion, you know, like the I don't know.
Just pass it.
No one here
accept it.
sounds
Right.
like
So it's my turn.
No,
Oh, yeah, we
no,
kinda
you
went out of
moved,
order.
Lindsay.
Yeah, you moved.
You
Sorry,
moved.
you lost
Yeah,
your turn.
you lost
We
your
can
You
do-
shouldn't have switched position then.
Just do the
Let's do.
cheers.
We
Just
can
go
have
like
Lindsay
that.
do one, and then we'll pass, and then we'll fix after that. It's
Why?
It's
Then
not
I'll
a
go
big
back to the
deal.
freaking
it doesn't
No,
matter.
just read.
Just go.
With a zealous grunt, the accordion flexed his tightly corded biceps, forcing the grim-faced soldier to one knee. The sentry plunged his right fist into Grignr's face, digging his grimy nails into the barbarian's flesh.
This is flesh.
Ejaculating a curse through his rasping teeth, Grignr surged the bulk of his weight forward, bowling the besieged soldier over upon his back. The sentry's arms collapsed to his thigh, shuddering convulsively, his bulging eyes staring blindly from a bloated, cherry-red face. Rising to his feet, Grignr shook the blood from his eyes, ruffling his surly red mane as a brush fire swaying to the nighttime breeze.
Oh yeah, this guy was definitely
Stooping
a
over
ginger.
the sprawled corpse of the first soldier, Grignr retrieved a small white object from a pool of congealing gore. Snorting a gusty billow of mirth, he once more concealed
Right.
the tiny object beneath his loincloth. The tediously honed pelvis bone of the broken rodent.
So tedious.
Returning his attention toward the second soldier, Grignr turned to the task of attiring his limbs. To move
Not his
about
loins.
freely through the dim recesses of the castle would require the grotesque garb of its soldiery. Utilizing the silence and stealth acquired in the untamed climes of his childhood, Grignr slink through twisting corridors and winding stairways, lighting his way with the confiscated torch of his
No.
Confiscated.
Pass.
Alright.
Where was it?
sophisticated.
So good.
Where's it?
Beginning of the sentence, though. Beginning of the
Yeah.
sentence is the real question.
Oh, it was here.
We're all very stuck in his cats.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
No, yeah, just the start of that
Allergies.
paragraph.
Yeah,
For all of
utilizing
us.
this.
No, for alright, let's. Utilizing the silence and stealth acquired in the untamed climes of his childhood,
Grignr slink through twisting corridors and winding stairways, lighting his way with the confiscated torch of his dispatched guardian. Knowing where his steps were leading to, Grignr meandered aimlessly in search of an exit from the chateau's dim confines. The wild blood coursing through his veins yearned for the undefiled freedom of the livid wilderness lands. Coming upon a fork in the passage, he shrieked, voices accompanied by clinking footfalls discerned to his sensitive ears from the left corridor. Wishing to avoid contact, Grignr veered to the right passageway. If quested as to the purpose of his presence, his barbarous accent would reveal his identity, being that his attire was not that of the castle's mercenary troops. In grim silence, Grignr treaded down the dingily lit corridor, a stalking panther creeping warily along on padded feet.
This is really good.
After an interminable period of wandering through the dark corridors...
Sorry, he has no concept of time. He's driving that home like every paragraph. Sorry.
1 minute later, an hour passed.
After an interminable period of wandering through the dull corridors, no gaps to break the monotony of the cold gray walls, Grignr espied a small winding stairway. Descending the flight of arsed granite slabs to their posterior, Grignr was confronted by a short hallway leading to a tall, arched wooden doorway. Halting before the teeming portal, Grignr rested.
Oh, no. That was pretty good, though. Portal got you.
No, it was Resties. Grignr Resties.
That's fair, too.
You gotta watch out for those Resties.
My resties are really swollen.
My Resties are besties.
Don't you mean your resties are gorged?
And
bulging.
Bulging, sorry,
Stygian.
bulging. And
Stygian Resties.
Stygian bulging resties.
Okay,
Interminable.
Terminal Stygian besties.
Oh no, I've got terminal
this is gonna be
resties.
really difficult. Oh no. Okay.
Also, for those watching at home, it's like past midnight now, so we're just...
We're getting
That's
punched.
the
No, for those watching at home, it's
Yeah.
whatever time it says in the lower right hand of your computer.
What?
Press
Here,
here.
the upper right if you're a Mac.
Or on your home screen. If you're
We have a Mac. What? I don't.
You brought it! I don't fucking know!
Welcome back to the C-pad.
All right. Where?
And these are my
Here.
friends.
I was halting. Halting before the teeming portal, Grignr resties his shaggy head sideways against the barrier. Detecting no sound from within, he grasped the looped metal handle of the door, his arms surging with a tremendous effort of bulging muscles.
More bulging.
Yet the door would not budge. Retrieving his axe from where he had sheathed it beneath his girdle, he hefted it in his mighty hands with an
For his girdle.
appeasant grunt and wedging one of its blackened edges into the crack between the portal and its iron-rimed sill. Bracing his sandaled right foot against the ruggedly hewn wall, teeth tightly clenched, Grignr pillavored the oaken haft, employing it as a lever whereby to pry open the barrier. The leather-wound hilt bending to its utmost limits of endurance. The massive portal swung open with a grating of snapped latch and rusty iron hinges.
Go Grignr.
Portal.
Portal fail.
Glancing about the dust-swirled room in the gloomily dancing glare of his flickering cresset,
Okay.
Grignr eyed evidences of the enclosure being nothing more than a forgotten storeroom. Miscellaneous articles required for the maintenance of a castle were piled in disorganized heaps at infrequent intervals toward the wall opposite the barbarian's piercing stare. Utilizing long bounding strides, Grignr paced his way over to the mounds of supplies to discover if any articles of value were contained within their midst. detecting a faint clicking sound. Grignr sprawled to his left side with the speed of a striking cobra, landing harshly upon his back. Torch and axe loudly clattering to the floor in a morass of sparks and flame. A elm-woven board leaped from collapsed flooring, clashing against the jagged flooring and spewing a shower of orange and yellow sparks over Grignr's startled face.
Oh, this because of a faint clicking sound?
Rising uneasily to his feet, the half-stunned accordion glared down at the gruesome arm of death he had unwittingly sprung. Mrifk! Look at that word!
Mrifk!
I don't even know!
Like who is
What was that? What was that?
Is Grignr singing that?
No, it's the accordion saying that.
The accordion comes is like
We've all unanimously decided to call it accordion. We've all come across, most of us have come across that word.
The schwa.
Accordion.
It's a
Is
schwa,
the
yeah.
accordion a bovine?
It's, yeah, so,
With
did
bovine
you see my
accordion.
Schwa comment?
It does
He's
say
fighting more
elm woven
animals.
board. I'm like, what?
He's fighting more animals than
I'm
humans so
so
far.
I don't
He's
understand.
fought like 2 dudes and lost both of
Leaped
those
from
fights.
collapsed flooring,
Did you see
clashing
my
against the jagged flooring.
No. Like, what if there was like a Mario with a schwa, like an upside down E on his head? Would it be Schwaluigi?
Kind of love that.
Schwario and Schwaluigi. Oh my god. They just speak under their breath a lot. It's in number 4.
Oh, sure, I gotta get a star.
I'm gonna do okay.
Okay.
Alright, back to Grignr.
Oh, I forgot.
If not for his keen auditory organs and lightning steel reflexes, Grignr would have been groping through the shadowed hell pits of the Grim Reaper. He had unknowingly stumbled upon an ancient, long-forgotten booby trap, a mistake which would have stunted the perusal of longevity of one less agile.
That's just longevity.
Yeah. It's hard.
A mechanism similar in type to that of a miniature catapult was concealed beneath 2 collapsible sections of granite flooring. The arm of the device was 4 feet long, boasting razor-like cleats at regular intervals along its face with which it was to skewer the luckless body of its would-be victim. Grignr had stepped upon a concealed catch which relaced a small metal latch beneath the 2 granite sections, causing them to fall inward and thereby loose the spiked arm of death they precariously held in. We have another drawing.
Sarah's doing
Oh, there's a nipple.
Can we just put that in there? I'll just throw that. Flip. That's what we got. Thanks, editing Rick.
Partially out of curiosity and partially out of an inordinate fear of becoming a pincushion for a possible second trap, Grignr plunged his torch into the exposed gap in the floor. The floor of a second chamber
Fuck
stood
that
out
floor.
7 feet below the glare. Tossing his torch through the aperture, Grignr grasped the side of an adjoining tile, dropping down. Glancing about the room, Grignr discovered that he had descended into the palace's mausoleum. Rectangular stone crypts cluttered the floor at evenly placed intervals. The tops of the enclosures were plated with thick layers of virgin gold, while the sides were plated with white ivory, at one time sparkling, but now grown dingy through the passage of the rays of all-encompassing Mother Time.
But Alan comes to
It's one giant word.
This word is ugly to
Does
look
that
at.
give you a regular
Featured at the head of each sarcophagus
regularly
in
irritated.
tarnished
Alan
silver
Thompson.
was an expungensively carved masterpiece of its rotting inhabitant.
Wow. Yeah.
Great to meet you, Alan.
The dingy atmosphere pervaded the air of the chamber, which sealed in the enclosure for an unknown period had grown thick and stale. Intermingling with the curdled currents was the repugnant stench of slowly moldering flesh, creeping ever slowly but surely through the minute cracks in the numerous vaults. Due to the embalming of the bodies, their flesh decayed at a much slower rate than is normal, yet the nauseous odor was none the less repellent. Towering over Grignr's head was the trap he released. The mechanism of the miniaturized catapult was cluttered with mildew and cobwebs.
Miniaturized
Notwithstanding these relics of antiquity, its efficiency remained unimpinged. To the right of the trap wound a short stairway through a recess in the ceiling, a concealed entrance leading to the mausoleum for which the catapult had obviously been erected as a silent, relentless guardian.
Hey, nice.
Nicely done.
Wow.
Little applause.
First
for
page
making
we've gotten in a while.
Yeah.
I
Also,
feel like
just
I
admire-
mean we don't have much
Yeah.
left
Everybody-
on the page,
Everybody
and
just
I
admire
don't
that,
think
that
it's
picture
really
there.
relevant.
Oh, her face.
Look at her nipple.
That's an awful lot of nipple.
Look at her
on there.
face nipple.
And like she's got like there's like I feel like there's like a caveman
No
character that
eyes.
has the hair, cover the eyes, and a huge nose that just comes out of the neck.
I think it's like a Far Side thing. I don't
Maybe?
know.
I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds
All right.
right.
Here we go.
Anyway, last paragraph.
Climbing up the side of the device, Grignr set to the task of resetting its mechanism. In the event that a search was organized, it would prove well to leave no evidence of his presence open to wandering eyes.
The floor is open.
Besides, it might even serve to dwindle the size of an opposing force. Descending from his perch, Grignr was startled by a faintly muffled scream of horrified desperation. His hair prickled yawkishly in disorganized clumps along his scalp, as a cold band still hung the length of his spinal cord. That's the whole sentence. No moral/mortal barrier, human or otherwise, was capable of arousing the numbing sensation of fear inside of Grignr's smoldering soul.
Note to self: learn difference between moral and mortal.
Yeah. However, he was
Are you immoral
overwrought
then?
by the forces of the barbarian's instinctive fear of the supernatural. His mighty thews had always served to adequately conquer any tangible foe, period, comma. But the intangible was something distant and terrible. Dim, horrifying tales passed by word of mouth over glimmering campfires, and skins of wine, had more than once served the purpose of chilling the marrowed core of
Doesn't
his
say skins?
sturdy-limbed bones. Does not say skines, it's skins. Or skeins, I don't know what the
No,
normal
it's
word
skins
actually
of
is.
wine,
Here it
it's
says
a
skins.
real
Alright.
No, that's a real thing, though.
Is it?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
alright.
Like a
I'm thinking of
waterskin
yarn.
or-
That's the skin.
No, no, yeah, it's
Lion
yeah.
skin.
Yeah.
Good
Sky.
skins. No, but skins of yarn, yes, but it's.
But that's
skins-
misspelled.
No, that should be skins of wine. It means it's an animal skin
Like a
sewn
hide
into a
that's
pouch
got-
that's full of wine. That's what they used to do.
I played Dungeons and Dragons before. I know what a
I-
skin of wine is.
Kind of yarn.
Yarn.
That's
Yeah,
what
I
I
bet.
I played Dungeons and Dragons. I got tagged back.
Anyway,
Sorry.
Yet the scream contained a strangely human quality, unlike that which Grignr imagined would come from the lungs of a demon or spirit, making Grignr take short, nervous strides advancing to the sarcophagus from which the sound was issuing. Clenching his teeth in an attempt to steel his jangled nerves, Grignr slid the engraved slab from the vault with a sharp rasp of grinding stone. Another long-drawn cry of terror-infested anguish met the barbarian, scoring like the shrill piping of a demented banshee.
you tried so hard. No, I know that there's a struggle. I think you might have lost it.
Another long-drawn cry of terror-infested anguish met the barbarian, scoring like the shrill piping of a demented banshee, piercing the inner fibers of his superstitious brain with primitive dread and awe.
Dread and
awe.
awe.
It's the promise. It's at the end of the line too. The son of a bitch.
That was like
All the rest are in the
JJ.
middle of the line.
So you want another long
Another long-drawn
JJ
cry.
Bulge.
JJ bulge.
Another long-drawn cry of terror-infested anguish met the barbarian,
I have to commit to it.
scoring like the shrill piping of a demented banshee, piercing the inner fibrous of his superstitious brain with primitive dread and awe. Stooping over to espy the tomb's contents, the glittering accordion's nostrils were singed by the scorching aroma of a moldering corpse, long shut up and fermenting. The same putrid scent which permeated the entire chamber, though multiplied to a much more concentrated dosage. The shriveled, leathery packet of crumbling bones and dried, flacking flesh offered no resistance, but remained in a fixed position of perpetual vigilance, watching over its dim abode from hollow, gaping sockets. The tortured cries were not coming from the tomb, but from some hidden depth below.
Oh.
Pulling the racking corpse from its resting place, Grignr tossed it to the floor in a broken, mangled heap. A Upon one side of the crypt's bottom was attached a series of tiny hinges, while running parallel along the opposite side of a convex railing like
You said
protuberance, laid so as to appear as a
Another
part of
favorite
the
word.
interior surface of the sarcophagus. Raising the slab upon its bronze hinges, long removed from the gaze of human eyes,
The word bronze?
Grignr perceived a scene
tough
which
one.
caused his blood to smolder,
So many
not
letters in the
unlike
word
bubbling
bronze.
molten lava. Directly below him, a whimpering female lay stretched upon a smooth-surfaced marble altar.
Oh boy.
A pack of gross-faced shaman clustered around her in a tight, circular formation. Crouched over the girl was a tall, pot-bellied priest, his face dominated by a disgusting, open-mouthed grimace of sadistic glee.
I love your grimaces.
Suspended from the acolyte's clenched right hand was a carven, oval-faced mallet,
The Hamburglar.
which he waved menacingly over the girl's shadowed face, an incoherent gibberish flowing from his grinning, thick-lipped mouth.
Ew.
Got racist. In the face of the amorphous, broad-breasted female stretched out alluringly before his gaping eyes, the universal whim of nature filing a plea of despair inside of his white-hot soul, Grignr acted as the only... Oh, fuck.
No, what did he act as only?
Said as instead of in.
So crazy.
I feel like that shouldn't have been
pretty
a
close,
killable
too.
offense, but
Yeah, but then you stopped yourself.
You
That's
get- yeah.
pretty much it. That
Place to
happened.
start.
Grignr acted, yeah.
Oh yeah, you were on a roll.
Thanks, man. I'll get it back.
You will.
Grignr acted in the only manner he could perceive, giving vent to a hoarse, throat-rending battle cry. Grignr plunged into the midst of the startled shaman, torch simmering in his left hand and axe twirling in his right hand. A gaunt, skull-faced priest standing at the far side of the altar clutched desperately at his throat, coughing furiously in an attempt to catch his breath. Lurching helplessly to and fro, the acolyte pitched headlong against the gleaming base of a massive jade idol. Writhing agonizedly against the hideous image, foam flecking his chalk-white lips, the priest struggled helplessly, hyphen, the victim of an epileptic seizure.
I'm afraid the event might be happening.
I know.
Size your hyphen. Ben, are you okay?
Does he have in real life? I don't know.
Don't
I'll
forget to
do-
breathe.
Where are
Oxygen is definitely your friend.
Do the axe attack of soothing.
Not the
Annex.
Annex.
Oh my god.
Trying to give him a
This was the day
We
we
may
killed
need to let his epileptic seizure continue while we let it go forward.
Startled by the barbarian's stunning appearance, the chronic fit of their fellow, and the fear that Grignr might be the avant-garde of a conquering force dedicated to the cause of destroying their degenerated cult, the salmon momentarily lost their composure. Giving vent to heedless pandemonium, the priest fell easy prey to Grignr's sweeping arc of crimson death and maiming destruction. The acolyte performing the sacrifice took a vicious blow to the stomach, hands clutching vitals and severed spinal cord as he sprawled over the altar. The disorganized priest lurched and staggered with split skulls, dismembered limbs, and spewing entrails before the enraged accordion's relentless onslaught. The howlers of the maimed and dying reverberated against the walls of the tiny chamber. A chorus of hell fraught despair as the granite floor ran red with blood. The entire chamber was encompassed in the heat of raw savage butchery as Grignr luxuriated in the grips of a primitive, beastly bloodlust. Presently, all went silent save for the groans of the sinking shaman and Grignr's heaving breath, accompanied by several gusty curses. The well had run dry. No more lambs remained for the slaughter.
Alright, he did it.
That's a page. That's not a page.
Sure it is.
Where did what?
I started up
Right
here.
up here.
No, man, sure, we're back here.
No, I
No, I
didn't.
didn't.
That
I think
was
you're
you.
thinking about you.
Started.
We are one of the Alright, go on.
I've got 2 paragraphs.
I'm in so much pain.
Do you feel like you're about to become?
I'm trying to get us through
Please,
this.
please help me.
No, sorry, disorder.
You're doing great. Keep going.
Space,
Keep going.
analyze.
The rampaging
Oh,
stead
yeah.
of death having
Oh, yeah,
taken
yeah.
of Grignr for the moment, left the barbarian free to the exploitation of his other perusials.
This poor woman.
Towering over his head
Are
was
you following
the
this?
misshapen image of the cult's hideous deity, Argon.
Well, it's not the eye, so. Just a little bit.
It was actually the whole Argon.
The fantastic size of the idol, in consideration of its being of pure jade, was enough to cause the senses of any man to stagger and
Only in
reel.
his eye.
Yet thus was not the case for the behemoth. He had paid only casual notice to this incredible fact, while riveting the whole of his attention upon the jewel protruding from the idol's soul socket. Its massively cut faucets emitting blinding rays of hypnotizing beauty.
Yes.
Faucets again.
Faucets. Love his faucets.
After all, a man cannot slink from a heavily guarded palace while burdened down by the intense bulk of a squatting statue. Providing, of course, that the idol can even be hefted, which in fact was beyond the reaches of Grignr's coursing stamina. On the other hand, the jewel,
can't
gigantic
get
as
the
it
statue.
was,
My stamina
would not
is
present a
coursing.
difference of any
Only
mean
for you,
concern.
baby. Only for you.
Help me, please. I can make it well worth your while, pleaded a soft, anguish-strewn voice wafting over Grignr's shoulders as he plucked the dull red emerald from its roots.
Dull red emerald.
Turning.
It still cracked me.
Grignr faced the female that had lured him into this bloodbath, but whom had become all but forgotten in the heat of battle. And what a great place for them to start. What a great place for
Come on,
them to
Lindsay,
start.
you got this.
Don't
Tell us
laugh.
all about where
I don't
keeping
know if
those
I
are-
did.
Don't
It's a bad
laugh.
place to start. Okay.
Be strong.
Jesus Christ, okay.
With gusto.
You
Gusto?
ejaculated the accordion of these though that I had seen the last of you at the tavern, but verily I was the same
Jesus,
girl.
it's the same woman.
Grignr advanced into the grips of the female's entrancing stare, severing the golden chains that held her captive upon the altar's highly polished face of ornamental limestone.
Let's pause her face or the
As
statue?
Grignr lifted the girl from the
Face of
altar,
the
her
lion.
arms wound dexterously about his neck, soft and smooth against his harsh exterior. Art thou pleased that we have chanced to meet once again? Grignr merely voiced a sighed grunt, returning the damsel's embrace while he smothered her trim, delicate lips between the coursing protrusions of his reeking maw.
I won't pause on it, but there should have been a comma between trim and delicate.
Oh, excuse me.
But minor
That's
offense.
how I say commas.
Can we get a replay on that?
That
That sentence was ridiculous.
Where does it start?
Grignr merely voiced and sighed grunt, returning the damsel's embrace while he smothered her trim, comma, delicate lips between the coursing protrusions of his reeking maw.
The
Coursing protrusions?
Yes.
What does
So
that mean?
protrusions of his reeking maw means
His
his lips
lips,
that
and
smell
they're
bad.
coursing.
Coursing like what? Like
Imagine
who are you? He's just like, wait,
She's got a couple
You happy about this?
kiss me, Grignr.
She's got some tough words coming up.
It's like, kiss me, Grignr.
I'm going to eat your mouth. We're back.
Here he goes.
He did it!
This is why Ben goes to bed at 10 every day. After midnight, he's done.
He's gonna let it all hang out.
You're ridiculous. Okay. Can you not?
I don't think.
I don't think he cannot.
I think it's pretty clear that he cannot.
I only
He
can.
can't even.
He literally
He
can't.
literally can't.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Even.
Okay. Let us take leave of this wretched chamber, stated Grignr as he placed the female upon her feet. She swooned a moment, causing Grignr to give her support, then regained her stance. Art thou able to find your way through the accursed passages of this castle? Rifk!
I think
Is he
it's
still
still
a
rare. I
loser?
think it's like
Every
the
one
alternate
of the
fun.
corridors of this damned place are
Oh, the
identical.
surly beard of fuck?
I'm Rifk.
I was at one time a slave of Prince Agathim. His clammy touch sent a sour swill through my belly, but my efforts reaped a harvest. I gained the pig's liking, whereby he allowed me the freedom of the palace. It was through this means that I eventually managed to escape of the palace. It was a simple matter to seduce the sentry at the western gate. His trust found him with a dagger thrust his ribs. The wench stated, whimsically.
Got it.
What were you
that's the
doing
word.
at the tavern whence I discovered
Whimsicorically.
you? Asked
Yeah, we got that
Grignr as
before,
he
right?
lifted the
Yeah,
female
yeah.
through the opening into the mausoleum.
This is mausoleum.
Oh, I like saying it mausoleum.
Okay.
Because you know, mouse.
That's just you.
Mouse has
That's
died in
Yeah, that's just my bad pronunciation.
Well, he did.
Um,
He
I
like
had,
Indian bird wanted death.
I
Right.
had
So-
sought to lay low from the palace's guards
Those
and
are
conducted
vision
their
organs.
search for me. The tavern was seldom frequented by the palace guards, and my identity was unknown to the common soldiers. It was through the disturbance that you caused that the palace guards were attracted to the tavern. I was
Yours.
dragged away
Flashback.
shortly after you escorted to the palace. What are you called by, female?
A very normal way to ask that. Yeah.
Rifk.
Carthena, daughter of Mincardos, Duke of Barwego,
Because she's a princess, too.
whose
'Cause-
lands
Barwego.
border along the northwestern fringes of Gorzom. I was paid as homage to Agathim upon his 38th year. Husked the femme!
She was a 38-year-old birthday
Hey,
present.
You made a page.
I need a page!
Yeah!
Oh, I can't wait to not get through all the sentence.
You got this.
Oh,
God.
this is a beautiful one to begin
Oh
with, too.
boy, I can try.
I believe in you!
And I am called a barbarian, grunted Grignr in a disgusted tone. Aye, the ways of our civilization are in many ways warped and distorted, but what is your calling? She queried bustily.
Oh, yes,
What is your calling?
I have heard
One
vaguely
get, one
of
guess.
Arcoria. It is the hill country to the far east of the Norgolian Empire. I have also heard... Damn it.
I have also poured.
I think we found our game back.
There's been too much talk of whoring in
So
this.
wait, Grignr is the accordion?
He's the
Yes,
accordion.
he's the accordion.
He's the accordion the whole time.
What a twist! Did Shyamalan write this?
Oh my god! He's a hill person from Accordia. God,
Okay, he
jeez.
was dead the whole time. Spoilers! I just told you how
I
science
have
ends.
also heard. I'm sorry.
Right here.
Right here. I
Baseball.
also
Play
heard.
baseball. That's what she says, right?
Yeah.
She says play baseball
Play
while she's
baseball.
dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Bruce Willis is there.
Yeah.
Bruce
Does
Willis
anyone need
sprinkle
anything?
the waters
Bye.
halfway down.
Ah, I have heard vaguely of Accordia. It is the hill country to the far east of the Norgolian Empire. I have also heard Agathim curse your land more than once when his troops were routed in the unaccustomed mountains and gorges, saith she. Aye, my people are not tarnished by petty luxuries and baubles. They remain fierce and unconquerable in their native climes. After reaching the hidden panel at the head of the stairway, Grignr was at a loss in regard to its operation. His fiercest heaves were as pebbles against burnished armor. Carthena depressed a small symbol included
No, it's a
within the
secret
elaborate design.
hidden portal.
You good?
We're good, I'm doing it now, don't worry about
Just
it.
the thought of Grignr not knowing how stairs work.
Oh,
It's
gotcha,
kind
yeah.
of
Carthena depressed a small symbol included within the elaborate design upon the panel, where open it slowly slid into a cleft in the wall. How did you come to be the victim of those crazed shaman? Quested Grignr as he escorted Carthena through the piles of rummage on the left side of the
That's
trap.
the last like 5 minutes.
By Agathim's orders, I was thrust into a secluded cell to await his passing of sentence. By some means, the priests of Argon acquired a set of keys to the cell. They slew the guard, placed over me, and abducted me to the chamber in which you chanced to come upon the Skazkutik sacrifice.
Okay.
Their hell-spawned cult demands a sacrifice once every 3 moons upon its full journey through the heavens.
Wait, why does she know it's every 3 months? Like, she just got kidnapped by
Or 3 years, I don't know.
It's
been 10 years, maybe.
They were startled by your unannounced appearance through the fear that you had been sent by Agathim. The prince would surely have submitted them to the most ghastly of tortures if he had ever discovered their unfaithfulness to Sargon, his bastard deity.
Sargon. Oh, Sargon.
So
Not Argon.
Sargon. Super different.
It stands for super
Sargon. Sargon.
I almost said-
Cenotaph. Sargon.
I almost said, fuck this game.
That's Eternal Darkness.
Eternal Darkness.
Argon.
Fuck
Blood.
I know, I was
Fuck this game.
adapting it for the.
It worked though. It took me a second. I heard Zenith.
Fuck this novella.
Many of the
Sargon,
partakers of the
Sargon.
ritual were high nobles and high trustees of the inner palace. Agathim's pitiless wrath would have been unparalleled.
Instead, they all got murdered.
Yeah.
Just saying.
They have no more to fear of Agathim now, bellowed Grignr in a deep, mirthful tone.
Just like with a quill, just ha. And anyway,
Boom.
A gleeful smirk upon his face.
Screaming into a book.
I have seen that they were delivered from his vengeance. Engrossed by Carthena's graceful stride and conversation, Grignr failed to take note of the footfalls rapidly approaching behind him.
It's always the girl's fault.
he's writing a book.
As he swung aside the arched portal linking the chamber with the corridors beyond, a maddened, blood-lusting screech reverberated from his eardrums.
From his eardrum!
Oh, the his brain screaming for help.
From his eardrums.
Seemingly utilizing the speed of thought,
Definitely.
What?
Seemingly.
swiveled. How do you
It's
spell
swiveled.
swiveled?
That's
With
incorrect.
That is
SWIVELED.
Oh yeah, 'cause there's an E after the V, which means it's
Swiveled.
swiveled.
No, that's how you do swivel.
Swivel.
SWIV.
ELED.
EL.
Yeah.
Turn to face his unknown
Only
foe.
well.
With gaping eyes and widened jaws, Grignr raised his axe above his surly mane.
Like chow mein?
Yeah.
Like chow mein?
No, yeah, it's, I mean, like,
Alright.
yeah.
It's
Just the wrong spell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, spelled
Oh, should've
horrifically
done-
wrong.
should've been a
Oh, me.
7.
Oh!
Where are you going?
I think you got
Hey,
one more paragraph.
15 years to figure that out.
With wobbling knees and swimming head, the priest that had lapsed into an epileptic seizure rose unsteadily to his feet. While enacting his choking fit in writhing agony, the shaman was overlooked by Grignr. The barbarian had mistaken the seizure for the death throes of the acolyte, allowing the priest to avoid his stinging blade. The sight that met the priest's inflamed eyes nearly served to sprawl him upon the floor once more. The sacrificial sat in grim... Son of a gun! I had one more!
Son
See, if you
I know you always get cocky near the end of your page.
I think this seems that a lot. I think we've had like 5 or 6
I did
of
that
that
once.
group. Right? We're still getting
Oh,
the
I'm
last
so
sentence
excited!
of that
I
first
hope I make it that far.
You can do this.
You just curse you will.
Believe in you!
Where am I?
The sacrificial sat
Oh,
in grim.
yes, okay. The sacrificial sat it grim, blood splattered, silence all around him, broken only by the occasional yelps and howls of his maimed and butchered fellows. Above his head rose the hideous idol, its empty socket holding the shaman's infuriated gaze. His eyes turned to a stony glaze with the realization of the pillage and blasphemy. Due to his high susceptibility following the seizure, the priest was transformed into a raving maniac bent solely upon wreaking vengeance.
Yes, because that's what seizures do.
With lips curled and quivering, a crust of foam dripping from them, the acolyte drew a long, wicked-looking, jewel-hilted scimitar from his silver girdle and fled through the aperture in the ceiling, uttering a faintly perceptible ceremonial gibberish.
Faintly perceptible.
7.5!
Woo! A short 7.
Yeah,
7.5 is already low.
Right? Alright. A sweeping scimitar swung toward Grignr's head in a shadowed blur of motion. With axe raised over his head, Grignr prepared to parry the blow, while gaping wide-eyed in open-mouthed perplexity. Suddenly, a sharp snap resounded behind the frothing shaman. The scimitar, halfway through its fatal sweep, dropped from a quivering, nerveless hand, clattering harmlessly to the stonage, cutting his screech short with a bubbling, red-mouthed gurgle.
I don't know how to spell.
The lacerated acolyte staggered under the pressure of the released springboard. After a moment of hopeless struggling, the shaman buckled, sprawling face down in a widening pool of blood and entrails, his regal purple robe blending enhancingly with the swirling streams of crimson.
Oh, that does sound nice.
Mrifk! I thought I had killed the last of those dogs! Semicolon before the marks, muttered Grignr in a half apathetic state.
I think it's like
I think it's like fun.
I feel like it's a character.
No, it's a god by the surly beard of Mriff.
But by the way that he wrote this, I feel like it's a character.
Unless it's by the surly
that
beard
makes
of fuck.
sense.
Then it's like,
No. I didn't catch that one.
He's like, oh,
when he did that.
When someone walks into me at Starbucks, I'm like, by the surly beard of Rick. So it's like, you're a real person, though. So it could be.
I don't have a very surly beard.
Yeah, I was gonna say, your beard's more,
Where's Murph?
chilling.
Okay.
Just,
Yeah, it's like relaxed. It's just
By
like,
the mellow beard of Rick.
There it is. That's fine. That's okay.
Okay,
I
great.
can use that.
By the
We all
low-key
learned a lot.
beard
Yeah,
of
permission
Rick.
for that, yeah.
Nay, Grignr. You doubtless grew careless while
Wow.
you over to your
Can you
lust.
go back a second?
Yeah, be careful saying that.
No, she
public.
cannot.
But let us not tarry any long lest we overtax the fates. The paths leading to freedom will soon be barred.
She's the most qualified here to say Nick.
Anybody else would not be okay, but
Dinner with a hard R, that's all I gotta say. The wretch's cries must certainly have attracted unwanted attention, the wench mused. By what direction shall we pursue our flight? Up the stair and down the corridor a short distance is the concealed entrance to a tunnel seldom used by others than the prince. And known to few.
No!
And known to few.
Alright, we're
Hey,
getting there.
the easy stuff messing us up. It's so funny.
Okay,
It's
wait.
like you don't know what words to trust and what words not to.
No, absolutely. I totally understand.
Like swiveled. Who knows
Yeah,
how to
no.
spell
I don't
swivel,
know how to
right?
spell swivel,
No,
apparently.
no.
I also don't know how to spell
I feel like
swivel.
reading this is
You're
like
doing
going
this.
into a dungeon.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
It's like you don't really know what you can
every
trust.
word you're like, I want
Is that a
switch. Here's the
trap?
secret
Yeah.
switch. It's spelled wrong. All right.
The secret switch.
Secret switch. How do these stairs work?
Sandwich.
Up that stair and down the corridor a short distance is the concealed entrance to a tunnel seldom used by others than the prince, and known to few others save the palace's royalty. It is used mainly by the prince when he wishes to take leave of the palace in secret. It is not always in the prince's best interest to leave his chateau in public view. Even while under heavy guard, he is often assaulted by hurtling stones and rotting fruits. The commoners have little love for him, lectured the narralady.
What?
What is that?
Nerelady.
Yeah, narrated.
Narralady.
Serenity!
Of course.
Oh, I'm surrounded. You guys don't even know what a narrated is.
It is amazing that
Have
they
you ever
would
been
ever
narrated?
have left a pig like him
Been a
to
while,
become
lady.
their ruler. I should imagine that his people would rise up and crucify him like the dog he is. Alas, Grignr, it is not as simple as all that. His soldiers are well paid by him. So long as he keeps their wages up, they will carry out his damn wished. The crude implements of the common folk would never stand up under an onslaught of forged blades and protective armor. They would be going to their own slaughter, stated Carthena to a confused but angered Grignr as they topped the stairway.
What?
Did we ever
Yeah.
Okay. Yet how can they bear to live under such oppression? I would sooner die beneath the sword than live under such a dog's command, added Grignr as the pair stalked down the hall in the direction opposite that in which Grignr had come.
Do you imagine them as a pair as well? What? Do you imagine them as a pair, like the fruit as well, for some reason?
No. That was just.
But all men
The
are
sentence
not
that
of the
didn't need
same
to be.
mold that you are born of. They choose to live as they are so as to save their filthy necks from the chopping block, returned Carthena in a disgusted tone as she cast an appeased glance towards the stalwart figure at her side, whose left arm was wound dexterously about her slim waist. His slow waning torch casting their images in intermingling wisps as it dangled from his left hand.
Oh my
God! Breathe!
Wow.
Oh, is this man already dead?
Yes!
Theis
wrote
is
this?
dead.
No, the one who
Jim
wrote
Theis died 15 years
Are
ago.
we already dead?
This might be
Is this
burning
now?
right now.
Presently, Carthena came upon the panel, concealed amongst the other granite slabs and discernible only by the burned-out crescent above it. As I pushed the crescent aside, pushed the panel inwards. Heard.
Oh!
I'm sure that's a.
Yeah.
No, it's C-A-T-R-H-E-N-A. Caterna. Well, how will you say it?
I don't know.
Alright, well, Felice is the judge, so.
That's true.
I think you
Alright, give it to
you
her.
did it.
Okay.
Caterna motioned to the panel she was referring to and twisted the crescent in a counterclockwise motion. Grignr braced his right shoulder against the walling, concentrating the force of his bulk against it. The slab gradually swung inward with a slight grating sound. Carthena stooped beneath Grignr's corded arms and crawled upon all fours into the passage beyond. Grignr followed after easing the slab back into place.
Isn't she still like buck naked?
I think so.
Yeah, she never really got much in the way of
She's like
clothes in
wearing
the
string, right?
description.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally just string,
yeah. Okay.
A string.
Winding before the
No,
pair
he's
was a dark, musty tunnel, exhibiting tangled spider webs from its ceiling to wall and an oozing, sickly slime
The piano
running
chord.
lazily upon its floor. Hanging from the chipped wall upon Grignr's right side was a
Capitalized
half-martyred corpse, its
Wow,
gray, flapping arms held in place by rusted iron manacles.
She flapped.
Carthena flinched back into Grignr's arms at the sight of the lyric
Nope.
set.
At sight.
Oh!
At sight.
I was
Yeah.
almost done too. I was
Alright.
like, finish that
That's what it is.
paragraph.
That's
We're
what
running
Get
on battery. Let's book
excited.
it. Here we go. Ready?
Carthena
Low
flinched.
battery.
Yep. Carthena flinched back into Grignr's arms at sight of the leering set in an ugly, distorted grimace, staring horribly at her from hollow, gaping sockets. This alcove must also be used by Agathim as a torture chamber. I wonder how many of his enemies have disappeared into these haunts never to be heard from again, pondered the hulking brute. Let us flee before we are also caught within Agathim's ghastly clutches. The exit from this tunnel cannot be very far from here, said Carthena with a slight sob to her voice, as she sagged in Grignr's encompassing embrace.
Pass it.
Aye, it will be best to be finished with this corridor as soon as it is possible. But why do you flinch from the sight of death so? Mrift! With the T.
Switching it up.
You have seen much
Lifting it
death
up.
this day without exhibiting such emotions, exclaimed Grignr as he led her trembling form along the dingy confines.
The
Open quote,
Dingy.
open quote, hyphen, 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 the man hanging from the wall was Doyanta.
Oh no!
Doyanta!
He had committed the folly of showing affections for me in front of Agathim, hyphen, hyphen, hyphen. He never meant any harm by his actions. At this, Carthena broke into a slow, steady whimpering, choking her voice with gasping sobs. There was never anything between us, yet Agathim did this to him. The beast! May the demons of hell's deepest haunts claw away at his wretched flesh for this merciless act, she prayed. I detect that you felt more for this fellow than you wish to let on. But enough of this. We can talk of such matters after we are once more free to do so. With this, Grignr lifted the grieved female to her feet and strode onward down the corridor, supporting the bulk of her weight with his surging left arm. Presently, a dim light was perceptibly filtering into the tunnel, casting a dim reddish hue upon the moldy wall of the passage's grim confines. Carthena had ceased her whimpering and partially regained her composure. The tunnel's end must be nearing. Rays of sunlight are beginning to seep into... Grignr chlamyed his right hand over Carthena's mouth, and with a slight struggle pulled her over to the shadows at the right-hand wall of the path, while at the same time thrusting this torch beneath an overhanging stone to smother its flickering rays. Be silent. I can hear footfalls approaching through the tunnel, growled Grignr in a hushed tone. All that you hear are the horses corralled at the far end of the tunnel. That is a further sign that we are nearing our goal. She stated!
Alright.
Hey!
I only got one.
Yay! Congrats, Ricky.
All that you hear...
I appreciate you, Ben. Thank you.
All that you hear is less than I hear. I heard footsteps coming toward us. Silence yourself, that we may find out whom we are being brought into contact with. I doubt that any would have thought as yet of searching this passage for us. The advantage of surprise will be upon our side. Grignr warned. That was surprise with a Z.
What a surprise.
Surprise.
Nice surprise.
Carthena cast her eyes downward and ceased any further pursuit towards conversation, an irritating habit in which she had gained an amazing proficiency.
Wow, we didn't talk too much, right? Am I right?
Jeez.
What a bitch!
Two figures came into the pair's view from around a turn in the tunnel. They were clothed in rich, luxuriant silks and rambling on in conversation while ignorant of their crouching foes waiting in an ambush ahead. ... That barbarian dog is cringing beneath the weight of the lash at this moment, sire. You shall cause no more disturbance. Aye, and so it is with any who dare to cross the path of Sargon's chosen one, said the second man. But the peasants are showing signs of growing unrest. They complain that they cannot feed their families while burdened with your taxes.
That's rough.
I shall teach those sluts the meaning of humility.
Everyone's a slut.
That might be the best sentence in this whole goddamn thing.
Order an immediate increase upon their taxes. They dare to question my sovereign authority. Ha! They shall soon learn what true oppression can be. I will... ... A showdown bulk leapt from behind a jutting promontory as it brought down a double-edged axe with the sped of a striking thought. One of the nobles sagged lifeless to the ground, skull split to the teeth.
Ew. I think promontory.
Yikes. It is, but...
Grignr gasped as he observed the bisected face set in his leering death agonies. It was Agnifund. The dead man's comrade, having recovered from his shock, drew a jewel-encrusted dagger from beneath the folds of his robe and lunged towards the barbarian's back. Grignr spun at the sound from behind and smashed down his crimsoned axe once more. His antagonist lunged, howling to a stream of stagnant green water, grasping a spouting stump that had once been a wrist. Grignr raised his axe over his head and prepared to finish the incomplete job, but was deterred halfway through his lunge by a frenzied screech from behind.
That's it. Two in a row.
Oh wait, there was a picture. I just want to see it.
There was a picture. It wasn't very
It's
exciting.
sort of like a face
Lady
with
with hair.
stars
see
around
it.
it. It's
Yeah.
Super hot space lady.
Where's her boobs?
I don't know what that
She's a slut.
is.
Oh, so is the whole kingdom.
I shall teach those sluts the meaning of humility.
On fucking taxes, bro.
What's that? Too many taxes to feed their family? More taxes!
Carthena leapt to the head of the writhing figure, plunging a smoldering torch into the agonized face. The howls increased in their horrid intensity, stifled by the sizzling of roasting flesh, then died down until the man was reduced to a blubbering mass of squirming, insensate flesh. Grignr advanced to Carthena's side, wincing slightly from the putrid aroma of charred flesh that rose in a puff of thick, white smog throughout the chamber. Carthena reeled slightly, staring dazedly downward at her gruesome handiwork. I had to do it. It was Agathon. I had to. She exclaimed! Sargon should be more careful with his right-hand men, added Grignr, a smug grin upon his lips. But to hell with Sargon for now. The stench is becoming bothersome to me. With that, Grignr grasped Carthena around the waist, leading her around the bend in the cave and into the open. A ball of feral red was rising through the mists of the eastern horizon, dissipating the slinking shadows of the night. A coral stood between
Was
the
that
pair,
sunrise?
Before the
Before the
fair.
enclosing two grazing mares. Grignr reached into a weighted down leather pouch dangling at his side and drew forth
Hey,
the scintillant red emerald he had obtained from the bloated idol. Raising it toward the sun, he said, "We shall do well with the bauble, eh?"
What?
Great rallying cry.
Carthena gaped at the gem, gasping in a terrified manner. The Eye of Argon! Oh! Kala! At this, the gem gave off a blinding glow, then dribbled through Grignr's fingers in a slimy red ooze. Grignr stepped back, pushing Carthena behind him. The droplets of slime slowly converged into a pulsating jelly-like mass. A single opening of transfixed the blob, forminth into a leech-like maw.
I'll give that to you, but there's a...
I call it if it's a.
Forminth.
Call it or
You
don't.
said of when there wasn't an of, but it's okay. Keep going.
No, that's
That's
the
that
thing.
is the rules.
But it wasn't like a fun.
it doesn't matter. That's the thing.
All right, I have to call it.
Gotta pass.
I love
you're
you,
supposed to be pedantic.
You gotta either call it or
I
not call
love
it.
I love
Well, I call
slightly real.
Yes.
It's like
No,
Space
you
Bobs.
didn't call it, you let them call it. You gotta call it.
Believe in
I-
yourself.
You always
Oh
call
yeah,
it,
let's
and
use
then
this. And she's like,
but they're gonna beat me up if I do it.
No, it's not that. I think it's stupid that like not funny errors
It's
will
the
end
whole
his
point.
turn. But
It's funny because his turn's over.
John thinks life is only worth living if fun happens.
Yeah, wouldn't
I
you?
mean,
You dumbass.
Alright, I believe you're right.
Great. High
A
fives
single
to
opening?
fun.
A single opening, yes, that's
There you
me.
go.
That was like a.
A single opening
Gentle loving.
transfixed
go back up and just like
blob
lean in.
forminth into a leech-like maw. Then the hideous
Are they kissing
transgressor
again?
of nature flowed towards Grignr. A tail. Damn.
That's
Oh.
It's
Wow.
Oh, good. Ben will
Oh,
save
wow,
us.
that was fast.
I will definitely get through a sentence or
Sorry.
two. I think we're right at the end.
I
here.
just work. I feel like my
I
head's
guess
way
that'd be
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Then the hideous transgressor of nature flowed towards Grignr. A trail of greenish slime lingered behind it.
Lingering.
Oh, Jesus.
That's
It'll come back to me, don't
We're gonna make it. You and I close this out.
yes, please. Me and Felice got this.
I know. I feel like there's like.
Then the hideous transgressor
Strong
of
point.
nature flowed towards Grignr. A trail of greenish.
Grignr?
Does that count?
That's fine. It's not even a word.
Does anyone know how to say that name?
Grignr.
Grignr.
Because you said
It's
Grignr.
It's whatever you want it to be. That
Whatever
word,
you want
that
it to
word is a
be.
wild card.
Yeah,
Give
we're
him that one.
Alright, just keep going, just keep going. We're almost done.
Then
Go
the
on.
hideous transgressor of nature flowed towards G, a trail of greenish slime lingering behind it. The single gap puckered repeatedly, emitting a ghastly sucking sound.
Ugh.
Grignr spread his legs into a battle stance, stealing his quivering fuse for a battle royale with a thing he knew not how to fight. Carthena wound her arms about her protector's neck, mumbling, "Kill it! Kill!" While her entire body trembled.
Kill it!
Wait, so mumbling is like, kill it, kill.
Kill it!
No, she's not shouting it, she's just mumbling.
The thing was almost upon Grignr when he buried his axe into the gristly maw. It passed through the blob and clanged upon the ground. Grignr drew his axe back with a film of yellow-green slime clinging to the blade. The thing was seemingly unaffected. Then it started to sluice up his leg. The hairs upon his nape stood. Oh no!
But that's exactly how to pronounce that word!
The hairs upon his nape So proud. So good.
Oh god.
Okay. The hairs upon his nape stood on end from the slimy feel of the thing's bewly bulk.
What?
Yeah.
The nautos sucking sound became louder, and Grignr felt the blood being drawn from his body.
Oh shit.
It's a leaf.
Whew. With each hiss of hideous pucker, the thing increased in size.
Oh, I hope it ends with him dying.
Grignr shook his foot about madly in an attempt to dislodge the blob, but it clung like a leech, still feeding upon his rapidly draining life fluid. He grasped with his hands, trying to rip it off, but only found his hands entangled in a sickly glue-like substance. The slimy thing continued its puckering, now having grown the size of Grignr's leg from its vampiric feast. Grignr began to reel and stagger under the blob, his chalk-white face and faltering muscles attesting to the gigantic loss of blood. Carthena slipped from Grignr in a death-like faint.
I like that she was clinging to him this entire
Yeah.
Right?
Leech on one side,
A
Slot on the other.
chilling scream upon her red, rubish lips. In final desperation, Grignr grasped the smoldering torch upon the ground and plunged it into the reeking maw that was similar to his. I added that of the travesty. A shudder passed through the thing. Grignr felt the blackness closing upon his eyes, but held on with the last ebb of his rapidly waning vitality. He could feel its grip lessening, teaching,
Yeah.
as a hideous gurgling sound erupted from the writhing maw. The jelly-like mass began to bubble like a vat of boiling tar as quivers passed up and down its entire form. End of available copy.
Your hero.
Oh.
There is.
It's over!
Your reeking maw.
Oh.
I
wanna-
I feel like
one of those
I should
word
pass
boards
it.
with
Like
the
that
There
was.
is, however,
I'm so excited.
Okay, well, there's this last, 3 paragraphs?
Yeah.
Lost ending?
The lost ending.
and
Felice gets to read against me. She's the checker.
Oh, the audio.
I get to check.
With a sloshing plop, the thing fell to the ground, evaporating in a thick scarlet cloud until it reattained its original size. It remained thus for a moment as the puckered maw took the shape of a protruding red eyeball, the pupil of which seemed to unravel before it the tale of creation. How a shapeless mass slithered from the quagmires of the stigmatic pool of time, only to degenerate into a leprosy of avaricious lust. In that fleeting moment, the grim mystery of life was revealed before Grignr's ensnared gaze. The eyeball's glare turned to a sudden plea of mercy, a plea for the whole of humanity. Then the blob began to quiver with violent convulsions. The eyeball shattered into 1,000 tiny fragments and evaporated in a curling wisp of scarlet mist. The very ground below the thing began to vibrate and swallow it up in a belch.
Oh, whoa! You gotta pass that to Rick because it was
With
with a belch.
God damn it!
All right, take us home.
Take us out, Rick. The very ground below the thing began to vibrate and swallow it up with a belch. The thing was gone forever. All that remained was a dark red blotch upon the face of the earth, blotching things up.
Are you serious?
Shaking his head, his shaggy mane to clear the jumbled fragments of his mind, Grignr tossed the limp female over his shoulder.
As you do.
Mounting one of the disgruntled mares and leading the other, the weary, scarred barbarian trooted slowly off into the horizon to become a tiny pinpoint in a filtered field of swirling blue mists, leaving the nobles, capital N, soldiers and peasants to replace the missing monarch. Long live the king! By Jim Theis, winner of the J.T. Rakash Award for Excellence.
He won! He won!
He won the whole book.
The JT Rakash, Rick!
His own Rakash? I couldn't tell you.
Jeez, JT.
I don't know. It's J-A-Y. Like the name, like Jason.
Oh.
That's really funny though.
So
Good
definitely
catch.
not
Fucking
him.
hysterical.
Wink.
It's like, oh man, I can award myself. I won it. Yeah.
All right, so that happened.
Alright,
That
so
was
this
the-
has been the CPAC.
That was the
I hope you
Eye
enjoyed.
of Argon.
Yeah, these are my friends: Lindsay, Ben, Ian, Felice, Heather on camera, Sarah, Rick, John, and Goji.
Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed that.
Thank you,
See you next time.
patrons, for patroning
Yeah,
us and
seriously.
getting us to this Patreon point.
For opening the reeking maw of your wallets and emptying your
Oh, what is
blood money into our
Like, comment, and subscribe if
Thank you,
you're
Rick.
bulging of the Eye of Argon.
And
Yeah, we already have another one of these coming up. So
yeah,
please
we got
donate.
another one coming soon. From the mind of Tim Burton as director. Superman Lives, starring
Sorry?
Nicolas Cage.
Yes.
A dramatic reading.
Somebody
by
tried
these-
to fucking kill me, man.
Spoilers. CJ really likes.
Yeah,
it.
he's-
Alright,
Anyway,
right
thank
file.
you.